What's good, everyone? This is Prime Fiction, and boy do we have a treat for you. Naruto was the lost son of Dracula who returned to Hotel Transylvania, and Mavis never once looked at anyone else. Hit subscribe and the bell. Let the story begin. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Smelled Like Midnight. The old man's hands were shaking when he pressed the medallion into Naruto's palm, and that alone should have been the warning. Old men in Konoha didn't shake. They sat on benches and argued about rice prices and complained about their knees. They did not grab teenagers by the wrist with fingers like iron clamps and drag them into alleyways at 2 a.m. with blood soaking through their shirts. Hey, old man, you're bleeding, we need to get you to quiet. The word came out like a stone dropped into still water. Heavy. Final. The man's eyes, one milky white, one sharp and amber, found Naruto's face and stayed there with an intensity that made Naruto's skin prickle. I have been looking for you for 11 years. I do not have time for a hospital. Naruto looked down at the medallion. Black metal, warm to the touch even though it had been pressed against the man's chest beneath his coat. A bat engraved on one side, wings spread wide. On the other side, a single word in a language Naruto had never seen but somehow, disturbingly, almost recognized. Like hearing a song you forgot you knew. What is this? A key. The old man's grip loosened. His breathing was getting rough. And a proof. And a message from someone who spent 12 years believing he failed you. Who? His name is Dracula. The man's amber eye caught the moonlight from the alley mouth and it flashed, just briefly, like an animal's eye in headlights. And he is your father. Naruto opened his mouth. Closed it. The old man slumped against the alley wall, and Naruto caught him without thinking, which was how he ended up sitting on the cold Konoha pavement at 2 a.m. holding a dying stranger who smelled like old forests and something older than that, turning a warm black medallion over and over in his free hand while the world he thought he understood quietly rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. Find the castle above the clouds, the man whispered. His hand found Naruto's wrist one more time, not gripping now, just resting. He does not know you survived. He needs to know. How do I? But the amber eye was already going flat, and the alley was already going quiet, and Naruto Uzumaki was left alone with a medallion that hummed against his skin like a second heartbeat and a name that felt like a door he'd always known was there, pressed against the back of his life, waiting. Dracula. He sat there for a long time after that, rain coming in slowly from the east, pattering off the rooftops and running in thin rivers along the gutter. His thumb moved over the bat engraving without him deciding to. The metal stayed warm no matter how wet the rain got. At some point he realized his hands weren't shaking, which struck him as strange, because by any reasonable measure they should have been. He looked up at the clouds, thick and low and moving fast in the wind. Above the clouds, he said, to no one in particular. Then he stood up, pocketed the medallion, stepped out of the alley, and started walking. 3 weeks, 2 countries, 1 disastrous boat crossing, and a mountain range that had absolutely no business existing later. Naruto stood at the edge of a narrow road carved into the face of a cliff and looked up. The castle didn't so much sit on the mountain as grow from it, towers rising like crooked fingers from the rock, windows lit amber in the dusk, walls black and wet from the clouds that swirled around its midsection like a scarf. It was the kind of building that made the word castle feel inadequate. Castles were things in history books, dusty and ruined and dead. This was something else. This was breathing. A wooden sign at the road's edge read, in cheerful painted letters that felt slightly insane given the setting, Hotel Transylvania, where every monster can just be themselves. Below that, someone had added in much smaller, slightly less cheerful letters, humans not recommended. Naruto read that last line. Read it again. Glanced down at his hands, tanned, calloused, entirely human-looking. Looked back up at the castle. Huh, he said. He started walking up the road. The gates were enormous, black iron shaped into swooping bat motifs that would have been intimidating if Naruto had any capacity left for being intimidated, which 3 weeks of increasingly bizarre travel had thoroughly burned out of him. He pushed them and they swung open with the kind of groan that was clearly theatrical, too perfectly timed, too resonant. Engineered atmosphere. He noticed that the hinges were actually well oiled. The groan was a choice. He appreciated that. It was committed. The courtyard was empty at first glance. Torches in iron brackets threw flickering orange light across cobblestones. A fountain with a gargoyle at its center trickled dark water. Bats wheeled in loose circles overhead, and Naruto tracked them automatically the way he tracked anything fast-moving, and then stopped tracking them because there were a lot and it was going to give him a headache. "You're not a monster." The voice came from directly behind him. Naruto turned around. The man standing in the courtyard entrance was tall, not freakishly, but with the kind of height that came with complete self-possession, like every inch of him was exactly where he meant it to be. White face. Black widow's peak. A suit so dark it seemed to pull light toward it. And eyes, red, deep, the color of old garnets, that were currently doing a rapid, intense analysis of every single thing about Naruto, cataloging and discarding information with a speed that suggested a mind that had been doing this for a very long time. The most famous vampire in the world looked at Naruto Uzumaki and the first thing he said was, "The hotel is for monsters." "You are not a monster." "So. How do you know?" Naruto asked. Dracula blinked. It was clearly not the response he'd been prepared for. "I beg your pardon. How do you know I'm not a monster?" Naruto had his hands in his pockets, the medallion warm against his fingers. He wasn't being smart about it, or well, he was, but not on purpose. It was a genuine question. "You looked at me for about 2 seconds. I have been doing this for over 1,000 years, Dracula said, with the particular precision of someone who usually found that sentence ended conversations. "I can tell." "Okay, but I've also been doing me for about 16 years and I can't always tell." Naruto pulled the medallion out of his pocket and held it up between 2 fingers, letting it catch the torchlight. The bat on its face seemed to ripple in the flickering orange glow. So. The effect on Dracula was immediate and total. It was like watching someone walk into a wall, a full body stop, every muscle locking, the careful composure cracking clean across the middle. His eyes went to the medallion and stayed there with an expression Naruto didn't have a name for yet, something too large and too raw for someone who was clearly not used to showing either of those things. His voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been. "Where did you get that?" "Old man pressed it into my hand in an alley." Naruto kept his voice even. "He said someone spent 12 years thinking he failed me." A pause. The medallion turned slowly between his fingers. "He said your name before he died." The courtyard went very still. Even the bats seemed to slow. Dracula's red eyes moved from the medallion to Naruto's face, and something happened in them, a calculation, a recognition, a terror, all in the span of a single second. His gaze moved over Naruto's features with a new intensity, no longer cataloging threat levels but searching for something specific. Looking for something he'd memorized long ago. "Your eyes," Dracula said. It wasn't an observation. It was more like something escaping. Naruto's eyes were blue, which was not typically remarkable. But they were a shade that sat at the edge of blue and something else, the color of deep ocean water at the point where sunlight stopped reaching. And in the torchlight they had a faint quality that Naruto had never been able to explain and had spent years not thinking about, a faint luminescence that wasn't quite a glow but wasn't quite not one either. His mother's eyes. He had his mother's eyes. "Come inside," Dracula said, and his voice had changed into something that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite getting there. He turned toward the hotel entrance. Then stopped. Turned back. Looked at Naruto with an expression that had too many things in it to read cleanly. "What is your name?" "Naruto," he said. Naruto Uzumaki. Something moved across Dracula's face that he didn't let become anything. Come inside, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto followed him, and the great doors swung shut behind them, and the bats resumed their circling as if nothing had changed, though of course everything had. The inside of Hotel Transylvania was not what Naruto expected, which was impressive because he hadn't known what to expect. He'd been operating on a rough mental image of dusty corridors, cobwebs, maybe some dramatic organ music. What he got instead was a grand lobby with high vaulted ceilings and chandeliers made of what looked like genuine bones arranged with real artistry, a reception desk staffed by a skeleton who was currently arguing with a mummy about the linen count on room 43, and a ballroom off to the left where he could hear something that sounded like jazz being played with too many instruments, and at least one of the musicians definitely wasn't human. He passed a werewolf in a Hawaiian shirt chasing approximately 9 wolf pups across the lobby carpet. A blob of luminescent green goo slid past him going the other direction and politely went around his feet rather than through them, which Naruto appreciated. A creature that was mostly legs and wore a top hat tipped it at him as it moved toward the elevator. Naruto said. Do not stare, Dracula said, without looking back, moving through the lobby with the practiced efficiency of someone who had managed this particular chaos for decades. They are guests. I wasn't staring judgmentally, Naruto said, genuinely. I was staring because it's interesting. The skeleton at the front desk looked up. His jaw clicked. Count Dracula, sir, this human, is my guest, Dracula said, and the weight he put on that word was significant enough that the skeleton's jaw clicked again and he turned back to his argument with the mummy. Naruto caught up to Dracula's stride, which was long and purposeful and clearly designed for walking through long corridors alone. So are you going to tell me what's going on, or are we doing a whole mysterious host thing first? I am deciding, Dracula said. That's fair. Naruto looked up at a painting of a pale woman in a red dress that hung at the corridor's end. Something about her caught him, not her beauty, which was obvious, but something in the posture. A readiness in the way she stood. Like someone who had spent their whole life being gentle but knew, in the bones of her, that she didn't have to be. Who is she? Dracula stopped walking. Naruto looked at him and then back at the painting. Sorry, I shouldn't have, no. A pause. Her name was Martha. She was my wife. Another pause, longer. She died. A long time ago. I'm sorry. Yes. Dracula looked at the painting for a moment, and then at Naruto, and then back at the painting, and Naruto could see him doing math, comparing something, measuring something against something else. Come. We will talk in my office. The office was at the top of a winding staircase and it was the only room in the hotel that felt entirely personal. Shelves of books with cracked spines, a desk buried in papers, 2 chairs by a fireplace where actual fire burned without any visible source of fuel. A large window looked out at the moonlit courtyard below, and on the desk, placed deliberately at its center, was a small framed photograph that Naruto clocked immediately because it was the only photograph in a room full of painted portraits. A baby. Dark-haired, pale-skinned, with blue eyes. Naruto sat down in one of the fireplace chairs without being invited. Old habit. Dracula noticed but didn't say anything, which told Naruto something. He sat in the other chair and folded his hands and looked into the fire and said nothing for a long moment. The medallion was my wife's, he said at last. I gave it to the man who took my son to safety. When it was no longer safe here. His jaw tightened. He was supposed to come back. Both of them. They did not. How long ago? Naruto asked. 16 years. The fire crackled. Naruto turned the medallion in his hands. 16 years ago. He'd been found, actually found, on a doorstep with nothing but a blanket and a name, 16 years ago. He'd always known he was left there deliberately. He'd never known why, and the village had never had answers. He looked at the photograph on the desk. Dark hair, pale skin, blue eyes. His thumb moved over the bat on the medallion. I have whisker marks, he said, somewhat randomly. Dracula looked at him sharply. What? Naruto gestured at his face, the 3 lines on each cheek, so familiar to him that he'd stopped seeing them years ago. Born with them. The doctor in my village had no explanation. He said sometimes there are birthmarks that, let me see. Dracula leaned forward, and there was something urgent in the movement that he was trying to contain. He looked at the marks on Naruto's face with an expression that was cracking around the edges. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a locket, which he opened, and turned toward Naruto. Inside was a tiny painted miniature, a baby's face, dark-haired and pale, with 6 faint lines on its cheeks. Naruto looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Dracula. Then he looked at the photograph on the desk. Then back at Dracula. Okay, he said. His voice was entirely steady and he had no idea how. Okay. So, Dracula said, and his voice was not steady at all, and he wasn't trying to make it be. I'm going to need a minute, Naruto said. Take the time you need. Dracula leaned back. He had the look of a man who had imagined this conversation for 16 years and found that imagining it had not actually prepared him for it. Naruto stood up and walked to the window and looked down at the courtyard. The bats were still circling. The fountain was still running its dark water. The whole impossible castle hummed around him with life, monster life, strange life, a kind of life he'd never been part of and apparently had been born into. He was Dracula's son. He was a vampire's son. He turned it over in his head the way you'd turn something sharp over in your hands, carefully, feeling for edges. He thought about the old man in the alley who'd given 12 years of his life to searching for a baby he'd been trusted with and lost. He thought about the way the medallion had stayed warm through 3 weeks of rain and cold. He thought about the way he'd always been faster than anyone he knew, always healed faster, always seen better in the dark, always felt most awake at night in a way he just accepted as a quirk of his personality. He thought about the look on Dracula's face when he'd held up the medallion. He turned around. I'm not going to cry about it, he said. Just so you know. I'm not, I'm fine. This is a lot but I'm fine. I am also fine, Dracula said, in a tone that suggested he was absolutely not fine. Great. Naruto crossed back to the chair and sat down. So what happened? Who took me? Why was it not safe? Dracula studied him, this boy who had walked into his home with his dead wife's medallion and his lost son's birthmarks and his mother's impossible eyes, who sat in a firelit chair and asked direct questions and didn't cry, who held himself with the particular stillness of someone who'd been knocked around enough times that stillness was a choice and not a default. Something in Dracula's chest, which technically did not need to function but functioned anyway out of habit and memory, did something complicated. That, he said, is a longer story than one night allows. I've got time, Naruto said. I don't exactly have anywhere else to be. Tomorrow, Dracula said, and it was not a deflection, it was something careful in his voice, like a man picking his way across uncertain ground. Tonight you should eat. Sleep. The castle will show you a room. He paused. Are you, he stopped. Say it, Naruto said. Are you well? The question came out rough, like it had been waiting a long time and came out before it was ready. They kept you well? Wherever you were, yeah, Naruto said, and he let the word be simple and true. Yeah, I'm fine. I had a good life. He meant it. It was complicated but he meant it. I just didn't know what I was. Dracula nodded once, sharply, like he was receiving a report and processing it into a form that could be filed away and not thought about right now because if he thought about it right now something would happen in his face that he was not prepared to allow. Tomorrow, then, Naruto said, and stood. Thanks for not throwing me out. You had the medallion, Dracula said. Naruto grinned, and it was the first time he'd grinned since the alley, big and bright and entirely unself-conscious, and it hit Dracula like a physical thing because he recognized it, not from the baby hadn't been old enough for that, but from photographs, from memory, from a face he had buried in a graveyard in the Carpathians on a winter night and never recovered from. His wife had smiled exactly like that. He was very still for a moment after Naruto left the room. Then he looked at the photograph on his desk for a long time and said, very quietly, something in Romanian that had no direct translation but meant roughly, "You were right, I should have looked harder, I am sorry, I am so sorry, I found him." The room the castle gave him was on the 4th floor, high ceilings, stone walls hung with tapestries, a bed the size of a small country, and a window that opened onto a view of the mountains that was objectively the most beautiful thing Naruto had ever seen. He stood at it for a while with his elbows on the sill and the night air moving through his hair, which was still doing that thing it always did, sticking up in 8 directions regardless of gravity or hair product. He heard her before he saw her. Not with his ears exactly, there was something else, a low-level awareness that prickled at the back of his neck, like a sound just below the range of hearing. He turned from the window and looked at the open door of his room and the girl standing in it. She was looking at him with an expression that was trying to be casual and was absolutely not casual. Dark hair cut blunt at her shoulders. Pale skin. Eyes that were dark in the corridor light but caught the moonlight from his window and showed themselves as a deep, clear hazel green that he catalogued and immediately found difficult to look away from. She was dressed simply, black, practical, and she held a tray with food on it that she was gripping with slightly too much focus for someone who was definitely not nervous. "Hi," she said, and her voice was carefully neutral. "I'm Mavis. I live here. Obviously. Because my dad owns the place. Which you know because you talked to him. I heard." She blinked. "I brought food because I thought, you're human, right? You need food. We have food. It's not, some of it is pretty normal. The sandwich is normal." Naruto looked at her. Looked at the tray. Looked back at her. "Are you always like this?" he asked. "Like what?" she said, with the particular sharpness of someone who knows exactly what you mean and is hoping you won't specify. "Talking fast," he said. Her mouth closed. She breathed. "Sometimes," she admitted, in a more normal tone. She held the tray out. "Food?" He crossed the room and took the tray from her, and when he did their hands overlapped on the handle for half a second, which neither of them commented on. He set the tray on the wide stone windowsill and sat on the sill beside it and picked up the sandwich. "You heard me and my dad talking," he said. It wasn't accusing. Just noting. She leaned against the doorframe. "This is a very old castle. The walls, there are gaps. In the stone. Between my room and his office. I didn't mean to." A pause. "Okay, I did mean to a little bit. He doesn't usually bring people to the office. He doesn't usually bring humans anywhere." "I'm not totally human," Naruto said, around a bite of the sandwich, which was excellent, better than anything he'd eaten in 3 weeks. Mavis's eyes did something interesting. "I know," she said carefully. "You smell like," she stopped. "Like what?" He wasn't bothered by it. He was genuinely curious. She looked at him with the expression of someone trying to find tactful language for something that didn't have tactful language. "Like the night. Not like cold or dark. Like when you're outside at night and everything's very still and there's ozone in the air, right before it storms." She looked at the doorframe like it was more comfortable to look at. "I've never smelled that on a human before." "Because I'm apparently not one," he said, simply. "Or not only one." He looked at his hand, the one holding the sandwich. Ordinary looking. He turned it over. "I don't feel any different. That's the weird part. I thought I might feel different after. He gestured vaguely at the corridor, indicating the conversation downstairs. But I don't. Does it bother you? She was looking at him now, carefully, with real interest, the kind that wasn't performing anything, just actual curiosity about an actual thing. Not yet, he said honestly. It probably will later. I'll let you know. She laughed, briefly, and it surprised her. He could tell by the way she put her hand to her mouth immediately after, like she hadn't meant to do that. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more, scared, maybe. She tilted her head. You walked into my dad's hotel alone. With that medallion. Knocked on the front gates. A slight pause. He's Dracula. Most people, most monsters, they don't just walk up to Dracula and start asking questions. I didn't know I was supposed to be scared, Naruto said. And also I really needed answers. So. He shrugged and ate more sandwich. She looked at him for a long time from the doorframe with an expression that was many things at once, curious, uncertain, alert, interested in the way you got interested in something that was new in a place where nothing was ever new. He was sitting in the window with the mountain view behind him eating a sandwich like he'd always lived there, like the castle was just a place and not the most deliberately intimidating structure in Eastern Europe, like Dracula was just a person who happened to be his father and not the apex predator of an entire supernatural world. Like none of it was a big deal because he'd decided it wasn't. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice was quieter now, the performance entirely gone. 16 years. Not knowing. It's okay, he said. It's not, actually, she said, with a gentleness that was sharper than argument. He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd appeared in the doorway, and it was the kind of look that meant he was actually paying attention, not just cataloging. No, he agreed. I guess it's not. He paused. But it's also done. So. She nodded slowly. She looked like she wanted to say something else but wasn't sure of its weight yet. I'll let you sleep, she said, straightening from the doorframe. Breakfast is at 8. Well, for the humans. The monsters mostly sleep through morning. But there's always something in the kitchen. Mavis. He said her name without thinking and it came out natural, like he'd said it before, which he hadn't. She stopped. He turned the medallion over in his free hand. Thanks for the food. She tilted her head, and there was something in the half-smile that crossed her face, not the big, reflexive kind, but the small kind that you can't quite stop. You're welcome, Naruto. She said his name the same way, trying it out, and it fit in her mouth right. She turned and walked down the corridor, and the darkness swallowed her up, and Naruto sat in his window with the mountain view and the storm-smelling night air and ate his sandwich. The medallion hummed against his palm. Below, somewhere deep in the castle, he heard music starting up again, the jazz, rolling and strange and full. The bats were still circling in the courtyard. The mountain fog moved slow and thick between the towers. He thought about the old man in the alley and the amber eye and the word find. He thought about 3 weeks of roads and boats and mountains. He thought about the look on Dracula's face at the photograph. He thought about Mavis's voice saying you smell like the night before a storm. He looked up at the clouds, thick and close, the castle peak cutting through them, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he was somewhere he was supposed to be. Not comfortable, not settled, not safe necessarily. But right. The way a key feels right when it touches the right lock, even before you turn it. He finished the sandwich. He went to sleep in the enormous bed with the window open and the night air moving through the room, and he didn't dream, and the medallion stayed warm on the nightstand where he'd left it, and the first chapter of his real life closed quietly around him like a door easing shut. Outside, in the corridor she'd walked down and then not quite walked far enough down, Mavis stood with her back against the stone wall and one hand pressed to her sternum, feeling the odd triple beat her heart had been doing since she'd looked up and found his eyes on her, those impossible sea-deep eyes that had looked at her like she was a person worth looking at, which shouldn't have been remarkable but was, for reasons she was going to spend a lot of time pretending not to examine. She breathed. She pushed off the wall. She went to her room. She did not sleep for a very long time. Chapter 2, Things with Fangs Don't Apologize. Morning in Hotel Transylvania was not a quiet affair, which Naruto discovered at approximately 7:45 when something large and enthusiastic crashed through the corridor outside his room and the impact rattled his door hard enough to swing it open 3 inches. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 5, restless in the way he always got when something large was happening and he couldn't do anything about it yet, and he was sitting on the windowsill watching the fog move between the towers when the crash happened. He looked at the door. The door swung open the rest of the way. A wolf cub, roughly the size of a medium dog and currently in a state of explosive forward momentum, hit the stone floor of his room and skidded 4 feet before its claws caught purchase. It sat up, shook its head, looked at Naruto with bright yellow eyes and a complete absence of embarrassment, and then made a sound that was halfway between a bark and a word. Behind it, breathing hard and wearing a wrinkled shirt that had definitely been slept in, the werewolf from the lobby appeared in the doorway. He had gray at his temples and the specific look of a man who had been chasing small things since before sunrise. He noticed Naruto on the windowsill, opened his mouth, and then closed it. "Sorry about that," he said. "He does this. I don't. There are 9 of them and they all do this. You're the new human." He squinted. "You're not scared?" "Should I be?" Naruto asked. "Most humans who end up here by mistake are pretty." The werewolf tilted his head. "You're not here by mistake." "No." The werewolf reached down and picked up the cub, which immediately tried to climb over his shoulder toward the door again, and looked at Naruto with the frank assessment of someone who had excellent survival instincts and was currently not sure what to do with them. "Wayne. Wayne Werewolf. Naruto Uzumaki." Wayne's nostrils flared once, not aggressively, just the automatic information gathering of someone whose nose was his primary instrument. His expression shifted. Not alarmed, but recalibrating. "Huh," he said. "What?" "You smell like Drax kid," Wayne said, with the blunt simplicity of someone who'd known Dracula long enough to not be precious about his business. He looked at Naruto again, differently this time. "You're Drax kid." "Apparently." Wayne stared at him for a long moment with the yellow eyes and the cub hanging off his shoulder. Then he broke into a grin that was wide and genuine and a little ragged at the edges, the grin of a man who had been on the periphery of a grief he couldn't fix for 16 years and was now watching something change. "Oh man," he said. "Oh, buddy. Does Frank know? Frank is going to lose his mind. In a good way. He cries at everything, fair warning." He pointed. "Don't let him hug you right away, he doesn't know his own strength. Say hi to him from across the room first." "Good to know," Naruto said. "You hungry?" "Wanda makes this thing, she's my wife, Wanda, she makes this egg thing in the morning that's technically for the pups but honestly it's the best thing in the kitchen." Wayne was already half turned toward the corridor, the cub now hanging completely upside down off his arm. "Come on. You can meet everyone at breakfast. They're all going to have opinions about you. Just, don't let Murray do the whole mummy prophecy thing. He does it with everyone new and it goes on forever." Naruto swung off the windowsill, grabbed the medallion from the nightstand and pocketed it, and followed Wayne into the corridor. He had been in the hotel for less than 12 hours and he already had a breakfast invitation. He decided this was probably fine. The kitchen was large and warm and smelled incredible, which was only slightly surprising given that Naruto wasn't totally sure what monsters ate and had had some vague anxiety about that on the walk down. But the kitchen smelled like eggs and coffee and something baked and sweet, and at the big central table there were already 4 people, monsters, seated with plates and mugs, all of whom looked up when Wayne pushed through the door and said, simply, everyone. This is Naruto. He's Drac's kid. The silence lasted approximately 1 second. Then Frankenstein, and it could only be Frankenstein, 8 feet tall with bolts at the neck and a face like a gentle mountain, wearing an apron that read Grill Sergeant, stood up so fast his chair scraped back 3 feet and said, in a voice like a foghorn, "What? Frank, sit down, Frank was looking at Naruto with an expression of pure overwhelmed delight, his enormous hands clasped in front of him. His eyes were already going slightly glassy. He's really here. Drac is going to, he pressed his hands to his face. I'm fine. I'm completely fine. Hi. He waved. It was the gentlest wave Naruto had ever seen from someone that large. Hi, Naruto said. I'm Frank, Frank said. Don't let him hug you yet, Wayne said, simultaneously. I wasn't going to hug him yet, Frank said, with dignity. I was going to wait at least 10 minutes. He sat back down, still visibly emotional. The mummy, wrapped in linen that had clearly been freshly pressed, with dark eyes sharp above the bandaging, was looking at Naruto with the careful intensity of someone doing rapid calculations. The stars said, he began, in a voice like sand on stone, Murray, Wayne said. I'm just saying the stars, not yet, Wayne said. Murray, the mummy, apparently, leaned back with the expression of a man deferring judgment but absolutely not dropping the subject. He picked up his coffee. The invisible man, and Naruto only knew he was there because of the floating glasses and the coffee mug that lifted itself, said, from the far end of the table, so you're actually real. Drac's been looking for you for 16 years. How'd you find the place? Old man gave me the medallion, Naruto said, sitting down at the table with the easy comfort of someone who sat at tables with strangers constantly. Died in an alley. Told me to find the castle above the clouds. Renfield, Frank said quietly, and something sad moved across his face. That was Renfield. He'd been searching for years. Drac didn't know, he thought Renfield had we thought he'd given up. Frank looked at his plate. He didn't give up. No, Naruto agreed. He didn't. A small woman with wild red hair and the kind of comfortable permanent exhaustion that came specifically from managing large numbers of children came through the kitchen door with a serving dish, noticed Naruto, stopped dead, and looked at Wayne. Wayne werewolf, she said, in a tone that meant something. Honey, I can smell who this is, Wanda said. She set the serving dish down, sat across from Naruto, and looked at him with an expression that was warm and direct and slightly fierce. I'm Wanda. Are you alright? 16 years alone, I'm fine, Naruto said. You can be not fine, she said. People say they're fine when, Wanda. He said it the same easy way he'd said Mavis's name the night before, not cutting her off, just meeting her on level ground. I'm genuinely fine. I had a good life. I just didn't know this part of it. She looked at him for a long moment, and then something settled in her expression, the particular relaxation of someone who had exceptional instincts for lying and had just confirmed he wasn't doing it. Okay, she said, and put eggs on his plate. It was, unexpectedly, one of the most comfortable breakfasts Naruto had ever had. Frank cried twice, quietly and without drawing attention to it, before 10 minutes were up. Murray told a partial prophecy that Wayne shut down after 40 seconds but that Naruto actually thought sounded interesting. The Invisible Man, Griffin, he learned, had a dry commentary on everything that came with the comfortable rhythm of someone who had been doing it for years. Wayne's cubs ran through the kitchen 3 times. Wanda refilled Naruto's coffee without being asked. He was on his second plate of eggs when he felt the shift in the room, a slight straightening, a brief quieting, and looked up to find Dracula in the kitchen doorway. The Count looked at the scene in front of him, Naruto at his friend's table, Frank mid-sentence, Wayne's cubs orbiting everything, and his face did something complex and compressed. He looked at Naruto and Naruto looked back at him and neither of them said anything for a moment. Good morning, Naruto said. Good morning, Dracula said. He crossed to the counter and got coffee and stood there with the mug and looked at his friends looking at his son and seemed to be deciding something. Then he said, he is staying. Indefinitely. His room is the 4th floor east. Nobody make it strange. We're not making it strange, Frank said, immediately, while actively wiping his eye. Frank. I'm not making it strange, Frank said, with less conviction. When do we talk? Naruto asked, directly. Dracula met his eyes. Tonight. After the evening rush. He paused. There is a great deal to discuss. There really is, Naruto agreed, easily, and went back to his eggs. Dracula watched him for another moment, this boy who sat in his kitchen eating Wanda's cooking with the medallion in his pocket and the whisker marks on his face and those impossible eyes, who was not afraid and not performing not afraid, who simply was whatever he was, all the way through, and then he looked away before his face did something he wasn't prepared to manage in front of an audience. By noon, the hotel knew. Not because Dracula announced it, he hadn't, not formally, but because hotels are ecosystems and news moves through them the way water moves through stone, finding every crack. By the time Naruto had finished breakfast and done a self-guided tour of the first 3 floors and ended up in the courtyard watching a group of teenage monsters play something that looked like volleyball but with rules he couldn't quite parse, the information had circulated completely. Dracula's son was here. He was 16. He was human-looking. He wasn't scared of anything. The response divided cleanly into thirds. 1/3 was immediately, unreservedly excited, primarily the younger monsters, who treated the whole thing as an event. 1/3 was cautious, watching from distances, making quiet assessments. And 1/3 was the specific type of uncomfortable that came from people who'd built their worldview around Dracula being a certain kind of person, alone, in control, grief-worn, and were now recalculating. Naruto walked through all of it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes open and let people look. He didn't explain himself. He didn't perform approachability. He just moved through the hotel the way he moved through everything, present and unworried, and let the looking happen. He was at the east end of the 2nd floor, examining a tapestry that depicted what looked like a significant historical battle with monsters on both sides, when he heard footsteps that he recognized, not the sound exactly, but the rhythm of them. Purposeful, slightly quick. Like someone who moved through spaces that were too familiar with the particular restlessness of a person who needed more space than they had. You're the only one actually looking at that, Mavis said, coming up beside him. It's interesting. He pointed at a figure in the tapestry's left corner. Is that your dad? She looked. Yeah. About 400 years ago. Before the hotel. She tilted her head at the tapestry. He was different then. More, she searched for the word. Public. Before my mom died, he was, monsters knew who he was. He was everywhere. A pause. After, he built the hotel and basically disappeared from the world. He built an entire hotel to disappear. He built it so monsters would have somewhere safe. She was looking at the tapestry but her voice had the cadence of someone who had thought about this a lot and reached a complicated place with it. Which is real. It's genuinely that. But it's also, he built walls. And then he called the walls a home. She glanced at him sideways. That probably sounds harsh. No, he said. It sounds true. She was quiet for a moment. You say things very directly. Is that bad? No. A small pause. It's different. She looked at him in that careful way she had, not shy exactly, but precise, like she was choosing what to let herself look at. How are you feeling? After last night? You asked me that last night. You gave me the short version. He thought about it honestly, which was a different thing from the automatic I'm fine he'd given Wanda. Strange, he said. Not bad strange. Just, like when you've been using a door for years and you find out it was a window the whole time. The room looks different but it's still your room. She thought about that. That's a good way to put it. You've lived here your whole life, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes. That's a long time to be in one place. Something moved across her face, quick and carefully recontrolled. Yes, she said again, but differently. He looked at her directly, the same paying attention look from the night before, and she held it this time instead of looking at the doorframe. Do you want to leave? He asked. Not provocatively. Just asking a real thing. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. I want to see things, she said, finally. The honesty of it was visible, like she'd been carrying it for a while and had just set it down in front of him. My dad, he kept me here. For my safety. And I understand it, I really do, because of what happened to my mom, and I love him, I do, but, she stopped. But walls are still walls, he said. Yeah. She exhaled. Yeah, walls are still walls. They stood with the tapestry for a moment, the 400-year-old battle frozen in thread around them, and it was a comfortable silence, the specific comfort of two people who have just recognized something in each other and are deciding, quietly, what to do with that. I'll show you around, she said. The hotel, not all of it is obvious. There are good parts. I'd like that, he said. Her mouth did the small unplanned smile again. Come on. The next 3 hours were the best 3 hours Naruto had had in recent memory, which said something. Mavis knew every inch of the castle with the intimacy of someone who'd explored it the way you explore a place when it's the only place you have, completely, obsessively, mapping every hidden corridor and forgotten room and architectural quirk because that was the size of your world and you were going to know all of it. She showed him the hidden library behind the East Ballroom, 3 rooms deep and lit by luminescent moss, where books in 17 languages sat in shelves that curved up into darkness. She showed him the roof observatory with the broken telescope that still worked if you tilted it 7 degrees off-center. She showed him the underground kitchen that predated the hotel by 600 years, where the stone was worn smooth in exact patterns from the feet of people now long gone. And she talked. Not nervously, the way she'd talked the night before, but with the natural ease of someone who loved the thing they were describing. She knew the history of every room, the story behind every strange architectural choice, the names and natures of every monster currently in residence. She talked about them the way you talked about people you'd grown up alongside, with the layered knowing of long familiarity, affectionate and complicated in equal measure. He listened. He asked questions that made her look at him sideways with the expression of someone recalibrating, not simple questions, but the ones that went a level deeper than where most people stopped. Why does the hotel exist as a hotel and not just a sanctuary or a compound, he asked, in the library. Why the hotel framing? She thought about it. Because a sanctuary is a cage with a nicer name. A hotel means you chose to come. You can leave. The door is yours. She ran her hand along the spine of a book without pulling it out. My dad understood that. Even if he doesn't always apply it to everything. She meant herself. She didn't say it directly but it was there in the pause, and he heard it, and she knew he heard it, and neither of them made it a thing. On the observatory roof, with the afternoon gone gray and the clouds moving fast, she pointed out the mountain ranges in every direction and named them, and he leaned on the parapet beside her and she was very aware of the fact that they were close enough that she could smell the night storm quality of him that she'd described the night before, closer now, real and strange and not at all unpleasant. She kept her eyes on the mountains. Do you fly? She asked. What? Vampires, some of them fly. Bat form. She glanced at him sideways. You haven't tried? I didn't know I was a vampire until last night, he said, with a reasonableness that made her laugh. Fair point. She tilted her head. Do you want to try? I could, she stopped. Could what? I could show you. Bat form. I've had it since I was little. She was watching his face for the reaction that most people had to the concept, the slight recalibration, the reassessment of the pretty girl in terms of the supernatural reality of what she was. She'd learned to clock that reaction precisely, the way you learn to clock the thing that came just before someone changed their mind about you. It wasn't there. He looked at her with the same even attention he'd been giving her all afternoon. Show me, he said. She shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no explosion of wings, no theatrical transformation. Just a smooth and natural change, like a word-changing tense. One moment she was standing beside him on the parapet, the next she was a small black bat that wheeled up from the ledge and made a quick circle in the gray air above the roof, fast and precise and entirely at ease in the way that bats were at ease in nothing else. She landed back on the parapet beside him and shifted back. Her hair was slightly mussed. She was watching him. Cool, he said. Not interesting in the recalibrating way. Not wow in the performing a reaction way. Just cool, flat and genuine, like it was exactly what it was, something she could do, something worth seeing, nothing to renegotiate the situation over. She breathed. Yeah, she said. It's pretty cool. He looked at his hands again, the way he'd looked at them the night before. I wonder what I'll be able to do, he said. Not anxious. Wondering. We'll find out, she said, and meant we, and didn't reconsider it, and he didn't comment on it, and that was the moment, though neither of them would have labeled it that way, when the we became a given. The trouble started at dinner. The hotel's main dining hall ran 2 sittings, one for the monsters who kept human hours, one for the ones who kept to darkness. Naruto landed at the first sitting by accident, following the smell of food, and took a seat at the long communal table beside a young swamp creature who was too shy to introduce himself and spent the meal staring at his plate. That was fine. Naruto was comfortable with silence. What he was less comfortable with was the group of 3 vampires at the far end of the table, older, dressed in old-fashioned elegance, with the particular quality of bearing that came from centuries of considering themselves the primary fact in every room, who had been watching him since he sat down and were now talking at an audible pitch that was clearly intended for him to catch. Never heard of a half-breed inheriting the title, the bloodline requires, even if Dracula claims him, what does that mean for the succession, exactly? Naruto ate his food and let it happen. He wasn't going to perform annoyance. He wasn't going to perform anything. But across the table, a vampire girl of roughly his age who had been introduced to him as Elsa Wittner, daughter of a minor count, here on a family visit, looked at the group at the end of the table and then at Naruto with the slightly pained expression of someone witnessing a social dynamic they found embarrassing. They're traditionalists, she said quietly. Old blood families. They think vampire aristocracy should be pure. They don't really believe in the hotel either. They only come because ignoring it would be more embarrassing than coming. What do they think would happen if they ignored it? Naruto asked. They'd lose the connection to Dracula, she said. And he's still the most powerful vampire alive. So. She glanced down the table. They're calculating. Calculating what? Whether you're a threat or an asset, she said frankly. One of the older vampires, silver-haired, with the kind of cold precision that came from centuries of being right about things, raised his voice just enough to be undeniable. The boy has no training, he said, to his companions but clearly for the room. He has no command of his abilities. He is, at present, effectively human. The claim is, are you talking to me or about me? Naruto asked. The table got quiet. The silver-haired vampire looked down at Naruto with the specific kind of patient condescension that people used when they were confident the other person would eventually understand their place. I'm noting facts, the vampire said. Okay. Naruto picked up his glass. What's your name? A pause. Count Aldrich. Count Aldrich. Naruto said it simply, no irony, no performance. You're right that I have no training. That's a real fact. You're right that I grew up human. Also a real fact. He set his glass down. But you called me a half-breed, which was rude, and you were doing it loud enough for me to hear, which was either careless or intentional, and either one says something about you that doesn't say much. Count Aldrich's eyes narrowed. You are speaking to I know who I'm speaking to, Naruto said, easily. I'm speaking to someone who's worried about succession and is deciding if I'm useful or dangerous. That's fair. I'd be thinking about it too, in your position. He met the Count's gaze steadily. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear you so you feel comfortable. That's not something I do. The silence stretched. Count Aldrich looked at him with a calculation that was now, openly, recalibrating. Whatever he'd expected, embarrassment, deference, the particular performance of a half-trained kid trying to prove himself, he hadn't gotten it. He'd gotten someone who laid the situation flat on the table and looked at it without flinching. He picked up his own glass. We will see, he said, which was not agreement but was also not a continuation of the previous tack. Elsa, across from Naruto, was looking at him with her eyebrows up. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Just, nothing. The swamp creature beside Naruto, who had been staring at his plate for the entire exchange, looked up briefly, met Naruto's eyes, and gave a single quick nod. Then looked back at his plate. Naruto went back to his dinner. He found Mavis on the roof again after the meal, which was either coincidence or not, and he suspected not. She was sitting on the parapet with her legs dangling over the edge and the night air around her, looking at the stars that were coming out between the moving clouds. She heard him come up the staircase and didn't turn. I heard about dinner, she said. Word travels fast. It's a hotel. She glanced back at him as he settled onto the parapet beside her. Are you okay? I'm fine, he said, and in this context he meant it differently than he'd meant it with Wanda, not a deflection, but an actual report. Aldrich is worried about succession. That's real. It's going to be a thing. My dad's going to, I'll handle it, Naruto said. She looked at him sideways. You've been here one day. Yeah. He looked at the stars. But it's already my home. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you say that very easily. It's true, he said. I don't need to work up to things being true. She looked at him with that precise look of hers, the one that was measuring something, not skeptically but with real attention. He turned and met it, and they were close on the parapet with the night around them and the mountain air cold and clean, and she felt the triple beat in her chest again, but this time she didn't press her hand to her sternum because she was busy looking at him and couldn't spare the movement. What? He said. You're going to change everything here, she said. Not accusing. Just observing. Probably, he agreed. Is that bad? She thought about it honestly. About walls and windows and doors that were really yours. About 16 years of safe and right and known, and the strange persistent ache underneath it. About the castle humming around her with life she loved and also, sometimes, the very specific weight of things that never changed. No, she said. I don't think so. Below them the hotel breathed and glittered, hundreds of lives moving through it, and above them the stars shifted in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the castle Dracula was in his office with his photograph and his fire and the weight of what he was going to have to tell his son tomorrow night. And on the roof 2 people sat with the mountain air around them and the night between them, and Mavis did not look away, and Naruto did not look away, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that meant something was beginning. Chapter 3, The weight of a name. Dracula found him at midnight. Not the comfortable dramatic midnight of Gothic stories, no thunder, no fog rolling under the door. Just midnight, the hotel settling into its quieter rhythms, the later shift monsters moving through the corridors with the unhurried ease of creatures built for darkness, and Naruto sitting cross-legged on the floor of the hidden library behind the east ballroom with 3 books open in front of him and the medallion in his hand. He'd found the books himself. Hadn't asked anyone. He'd come back to the library after leaving Mavis on the roof and started pulling things off shelves at random until he found the ones that felt relevant: histories, genealogies, a journal with a cracked spine that turned out to be written in the same language as the back of the medallion. He couldn't read it, but he kept coming back to it, running his thumb along the script the way you return to a song you didn't know the words to yet. Dracula stood in the library doorway and looked at him for a moment before saying anything. "You found this room on your own," he said. "Mavis showed me." Naruto didn't look up from the genealogy. "Is this us?" Dracula crossed the room and looked at the page. A family tree, dense and branching, going back far enough that the names at the top were in Latin. His finger found a name near the bottom without hesitation, the muscle memory of a man who had looked at this page many times. Vladislaus Dracula. Below it, branching, a line to Martha, and from Martha, 2 lines. One had a name. The other had a dash and a question mark where a name should have been. "That is where you belong," Dracula said, pointing at the question mark. Naruto looked at it for a long moment. Then he pulled out the medallion and set it on the page, the bat face up, and it sat there between the open book and the lamp with the quiet authority of something returned to its correct place. "Sit down," Naruto said. "Tell me what happened." Dracula pulled a chair close and sat. He did it without the usual performance of authority, no arranging himself, no composure building. He just sat, and he was, for the first time since Naruto had arrived, fully visible. The grief and the guilt and the 16 years of it, right there on the surface. "You had a sister," he said. "Mavis. She was 4 when you were born." Naruto looked up. "She does not know," Dracula said, quickly. I did not know how, for a long time. And then time passed, and it became harder, and," he stopped. His jaw tightened. "That is a failure. I am aware." "Keep going," Naruto said. "Not forgiving it, not condemning it. Just moving." Dracula's hands were folded in his lap. He looked at them. "After Martha died, your mother, I was not well. For a long time I was not well. I built the hotel because I needed to build something, or I would have destroyed things instead." He said it plainly, no drama, just fact. "And then Mavis was born, and she was everything. She was Martha's and mine, and she was alive, and that was enough for a long time." He paused. "And then you came." Something in the way he said it, quiet and unguarded, made Naruto be still and let it come. "I did not expect you. Martha had been gone for years. Your mother," he stopped. "Reorganized. Your birth mother. She was not, we were not, it was not a relationship of the kind that produces children, typically. She was human. She was kind. She was only with us for a short season." His voice was careful but honest. "She died in childbirth. You were a surprise that became the most important thing." "She was human," Naruto said. "Yes. Which makes me half. Yes." He met Naruto's eyes. "Which is not a lesser thing. I want to be clear about that. You were never less to me because of it." Naruto absorbed that. Filed it. "What happened?" Dracula stood. Not because he needed distance, but because what he was about to say needed him to be moving. He walked to the shelves and touched the spines of books without pulling any out, and spoke with his back to Naruto, and his voice was level in the specific way that things were level when they cost something to keep level. "There is a vampire, I believed him dead. His name is Vladimir. He is my older brother." Naruto went very still. "He was never, Vladimir was never comfortable with what I built here. The hotel. The coexistence. He came from a time, and believed in a world, where monsters ruled and humans feared. That was not philosophy for him. It was identity. It was correct, to him, the way gravity is correct, just the nature of things. Dracula turned around. When I began building the hotel, we argued. For years we argued. And then one night he came to the castle and we argued for the last time and he left and I believed, I was told, that he had died. An old enemy. A conflict in the east. He didn't die, Naruto said. He did not die. Dracula's voice was flat. He staged it. He has been watching. For decades, watching the hotel grow, watching me build something he considers an abomination, a surrender, a humiliation of everything our kind was. He paused. When you were born, when he learned that I had an heir, a son, a vampire child who would inherit the hotel and the name and the bloodline, he moved. He took me, Naruto said. He arranged it. The words came out measured and controlled and underneath them something very old and very hot. He did not take you himself. He used people. Humans he had leverage over, and a vampire in my employ who had old loyalties I did not know about. They took you from your room. They gave you to a human family in the east, away from everything, with instructions to, he stopped. They were told to ensure you did not survive. The library was very quiet. But Renfield got there first, Naruto said. Renfield suspected. Dracula sat back down, heavily. He had noticed things. The vampire in my employ behaving strangely. Certain visitors. He did not tell me because he was not certain, and he thought he could handle it himself. He was wrong, but he was not too late. Something crossed Dracula's face. He got to you before they did. He took you and ran. He hid you in the human village. He was going to send word once it was safe. His voice quieted. But Vladimir's people were still looking. Renfield spent 16 years moving, hiding, drawing attention away from where you were. He never stopped. He just ran out of time before he could come back. Naruto looked at the medallion on the open page. The question mark where his name should have been. You didn't know I was alive, he said. I was told you were dead. The word landed like something dropped from a height. I was told you were taken and killed before Renfield could reach you. I believed it. I mourned you. A pause, very small. I named the grave with the question mark, which was foolish, perhaps, but I could not, I did not, you couldn't name it, Naruto said. No. Naruto picked up the medallion. Turned it over to the inscription side. The unknown language that he almost recognized, that came to him like a half-remembered song. What does the inscription say? He asked. Dracula was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that he had to hold carefully to keep from breaking, it says you are found wherever you go. He looked at his hands. Martha used to say it to Mavis. When Mavis was afraid of getting lost. She would hold her hands and say it. His jaw worked. I had it put on the medallion when you were born. Before everything. It was a gift. For you. Naruto closed his hand around the medallion. He sat with it for a long moment, and Dracula let him sit with it, because 16 years of guilt had taught him that some things needed the space they needed and couldn't be rushed through. When Naruto looked up, his eyes were dry and his face was the face of someone who was processing something enormous without letting it tip him over. Not because he was suppressing it. Because he was that particular kind of person who held large things without being flattened by them. Vladimir, he said. Is he still out there? Yes. Dracula's voice shifted, not harder exactly, but more careful, the way a man's voice shifted when he moved from grief to something that had a shape and a direction. He has been quiet for some years. But when I think about Renfield, what it means that Renfield found you now, that he came to you now, he was dying, Naruto said. He was wounded. Someone found him. Yes, Dracula said quietly. Which means Vladimir knows Renfield reached you. Which means Vladimir knows you are alive. He looked at Naruto steadily. Which means we have a limited time before he decides what to do with that information. What does he want with me? Naruto asked. Not scared. Assessing. He will want to use you, Dracula said. Or eliminate you. One or the other, depending on whether he decides you are convertible. He paused. You are the heir to the oldest vampire bloodline in existence. You have the name, the blood, the claim. To the old world faction, the ones who still believe in what Vladimir believes, you could be a symbol. A rallying point. A justification. He met Naruto's eyes. If he can't turn you to his purpose, you're a threat. Either way, he'll come. Good, Naruto said. Dracula blinked. Good. I don't like waiting, Naruto said. I'd rather he came here where I know the ground. Dracula looked at him with something that was alarm and something that was, despite everything, the faintest beginning of something else. Pride was too clean a word for it. Recognition, maybe. Something that said there you are. You are remarkably unconcerned, Dracula said. I'm concerned, Naruto said. I'm just not afraid. He said it the way you stated a weather fact. Those are different things. Dracula was quiet for a moment. Then, your mother was the same way. It was the first time he'd said it, your mother, in a direct, present tense way. Not the woman who bore you or the circumstances of your birth. Just your mother, simple and clear, with all the weight of what that meant. Naruto looked at him. Tell me about her. Dracula looked at him back, and the library hummed around them with the age of its books and the particular quality of spaces that had held secrets for a long time, and he told him. Her name. The sound of her voice. The way she had found the hotel by accident and stayed for a season because she had nowhere pressing to be, and the castle had seemed to her like the most interesting place she'd ever come across. The way she had looked at Naruto's face the one time she'd seen it, in the hours before she was gone, with an expression that was all love and no fear. He talked for a long time. He was not a man who talked easily about tender things, but he talked, because his son was sitting in front of him asking, and 16 years was already too long a silence. Naruto came out of the library sometime after 2 in the morning and stood in the east ballroom corridor for a moment with his hand on the doorframe and the medallion warm in his closed fist. The hotel was deep in its night hours now, barely anyone moving, only the distant sound of something musical from the underground bar, and the soft shuffle of nocturnal guests moving on silent feet through the upper floors. He had a father. He had a dead mother he would never meet, who had looked at his face once with all the love in the world, and a father who had named a grave with a question mark because he couldn't make himself put a name on something he refused to fully believe was gone. He had a sister who didn't know he was her brother. He had an enemy who was old and patient and intelligent and already knew he was here. He stood with all of that and felt it settle into him, not crushing him but changing the shape of things, the way a stone changes the shape of water around it. He was not the same person he'd been 3 weeks ago in the alley. He was not even the same person he'd been this morning at breakfast. Things kept moving, and he kept moving with them, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. He heard her before he saw her. The rhythm of her footsteps on the stone. He turned. Mavis came around the corner from the direction of the staircase in soft dark clothing with her hair loose and her eyes alert in the way that said she'd been awake rather than woken up. She stopped when she saw him. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She looked at him with those precise eyes and clocked everything, the medallion in his hand, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of silence he was carrying. "How long were you in there with him?" "A couple of hours." She came and stood beside him, leaning her back against the wall across from the library door, and looked at him without pushing. Waiting for whatever he decided to give. "He told me everything," Naruto said. She nodded slowly. "About Vladimir," he said. "About what happened?" He paused. "About my mother." Her face was careful and open at the same time. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." He looked at the medallion. "He needs to tell you something," he said. "I'm not going to tell you what because it's his to tell. But you should, it should come from him. And soon." She looked at him steadily. He could see her turning it over, building hypotheses, her mind working fast under the composed surface. He watched her get close to it and then not quite arrive, because it was the kind of thing you didn't arrive at through logic, only through being told. "It's about you," she said. "Not a question." "Partly," he said. "It's about both of us." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he held hers, and there was something happening in the space between that look that was real and present and made the practical matters of secret brothers and ancient enemies feel briefly secondary. Then she breathed. "Okay," she said. "I'll talk to him tomorrow." "Today," he said. "It's already today." She almost smiled. "Okay. Today." He pushed off the doorframe. "I'm going to sleep," he said. "This has been," he tilted his head, searching for the right word. "A lot." "A lot," she agreed. He looked at her. "You knew he was going to tell me tonight." "I suspected," she said. He gets this specific look. Before big conversations. She paused. "He had it all day. You watch him closely." "He's all I have," she said, simply. No self-pity in it. Just the plain fact of someone who had oriented their entire world around one person because that was the size of the world she'd been given. It landed differently than she probably meant it to, and he saw her hear it land differently, and her jaw set slightly. "That's changing," he said, equally simply. She looked at him with something that was complicated and true and too new to have a clean name yet. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think it is." He walked down the corridor toward the stairs, and she watched him go, and she stayed leaning against the wall for a while after he rounded the corner. The medallion inscription moved through her head. She'd glimpsed it on the page when she'd looked into the library once from the doorway tonight, not reading, just seeing the shape of it. She didn't know the language. She wondered what it said. The confrontation happened the next afternoon, and it was nothing like what anyone would have planned. Dracula had asked Naruto to come to his office at 4. What he had not planned on was Mavis having talked to him at noon, having walked into his office with the particular directness of someone who had decided not to do the slow approach and said, simply, "Naruto told me you need to tell me something. So tell me." And Dracula, who had been mentally preparing a careful and structured disclosure, found himself telling her all of it at noon instead of the planned telling Naruto at 4, and was still sitting in the aftermath of that conversation, Mavis having left the office 20 minutes ago without saying where she was going, when Naruto knocked at 4. He opened the door and read the room immediately. "She knows," he said. "She knows," Dracula confirmed. He looked like someone who had run a long race. She did not react the way I expected." "How did she react?" "She was quiet," he said, like that was more frightening than any of the alternatives. "She listened. And then she said she needed to walk, and she left." He looked at Naruto. "She is somewhere in the hotel. I don't know where she is and she is not responding to we have a way of communicating, across distance, it is a vampire thing, I'll find her," Naruto said. "Naruto, I'll find her." He was already turning. "Give her space but not so much space that she goes somewhere cold." He paused at the door. "And Dracula." He used the name directly, not Dad, not Count, just the name, clean and present. "You should have told her sooner. You know that." "I know that," Dracula said. "Okay. No lecture. Just the fact, stated once and left to sit. He was already out the door. He found her in 40 minutes. Not by logic, not by thinking about where she'd go, but by the same low-level awareness that had told him she was in the doorway of his room on the first night. The prickling at the back of his neck that he was beginning to understand was something other than ordinary instinct. He followed it up through the castle, past the observatory level, past the highest guest rooms, up a narrow stair he hadn't found on his own tour, and out through a small door onto a section of the outer battlements that looked like it hadn't been walked on in decades. Mavis was sitting on a stone merlon with her knees pulled up and her arms around them, looking out at the mountains, and she didn't turn when she heard him come through the door. He walked to the battlement and sat on the stone beside her, close but not pressing. The mountains were doing something extraordinary in the late afternoon light. The clouds had broken and the peaks were catching the last of the sun in a way that turned the snow to bronze and the rock to dark purple, and below them the forest stretched to every horizon in every shade of green. She didn't say anything for a while. He didn't either. He'd learned, in the past 2 days, the specific grammar of her silences, which ones wanted filling and which ones didn't. This one didn't. "You're my brother," she said finally. Still looking at the mountains. "Yeah. And you didn't tell me last night." "It was his to tell," he said. "I said that." "I know you said that." Her voice was controlled but not entirely. There was something underneath it, a rawness, the particular rawness of someone who had discovered that the map they'd been using was missing an entire continent. "I'm not angry at you. I don't think I'm angry at you." "Who are you angry at?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm angry at 16 years, she said. "I grew up alone in this castle and my brother was alive somewhere and my father," she stopped. "He thought you were dead." "I know that. I know that. But he knew something happened and he never." Another stop. "He rebuilt everything around protecting me and he couldn't protect the one thing that, Mavis." His voice was quiet but direct. She turned and looked at him, and her eyes were bright but dry, which he understood now was just who she was, someone who felt things at full volume but kept the expression of it private, held inside where it couldn't be managed by anyone else. "You're allowed to be angry," he said. "That's not a thing you need to talk yourself out of." "I know. But you're also going to have to decide what you do with it. Not advice. Not instruction. Just the truth as he saw it, laid flat. Because he's still your dad. And he spent 16 years mourning something that was actually alive, which is its own kind of damage." She looked at him. "You're defending him." "I'm describing him," he said. "It's different." He paused. "I'm angrier than you are, probably. He's my father and I grew up without him and someone took me on his behalf. I have more reason to be angry." He looked at the mountains. "But I've been here 3 days and I've seen him look at me and I know what's in his face when he does, and that's real. Whatever he failed at, that's real." She was quiet for a long time. The mountains went darker as the light changed. A hawk circled far below them, small as a speck against the forest. "I didn't know I was lonely," she said, quietly. "That's the strange part. I thought I was fine. I thought the hotel was enough, the people here were enough, my dad was enough." She looked at her hands. "And then you showed up and she stopped." He waited. "I realized," she said. "How much of me was waiting." A pause. "Not for you specifically. I didn't know about you. But, for someone who was, she was searching for it. Someone who was mine. Who I didn't have to be careful with. Who I could just," she looked at him sideways. "You know?" "Yeah," he said. "I know." She leaned her head slightly to the side, not on his shoulder, not yet, they weren't there yet, but in the direction of him, a small physical adjustment that meant something. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I'm furious and I'm sad and I'm glad." Those can all be true at the same time, he said. They are all true at the same time, she said, with the slight exasperation of someone confirming an obvious but inconvenient fact. He grinned. She saw it, and despite everything, the small smile happened. And then they were both looking at the mountains, and the light was going golden, and the hawk was still circling, and the hotel hummed below them with its improbable life. "What's Vladimir like?" she asked, after a while. Something sharpened in him, quick and clean. "I don't know yet." "Dad told you about him?" "Yeah." He paused. "He's patient. Smart. He's been doing this for centuries, and he doesn't move until he's ready. He turned the information over, the way he turned the medallion over. Feeling for edges. He wants to use me or get rid of me. He knows I'm here." "He'll come," she said. "Not a question." "He'll come," Naruto agreed. "But not yet. He'll watch first. He'll send someone to look, to get a sense of who I am and what I can do." He said it with the ease of someone who had grown up in a world where enemies were a given and the question was never if but when and how. "The Count at dinner last night, Aldrich." She straightened. "You think he's connected to Vladimir?" "I think he's interested in succession for reasons that aren't just social. I think the timing of his visit is worth noting." He shrugged. "Could be nothing. But it's worth watching." She looked at him with the expression she'd had on the roof, the one that was measuring something, recalibrating. But now it had a new quality in it, a warmth that was past the stage of uncertainty. "You've been here 3 days, she said. "Yeah. And you're all ready, I told you," he said. "It's my home." He turned and looked at her directly, and the light was doing something to his eyes, the ocean deep blue catching the gold of the sunset and throwing back something that sat right at the edge of human. "That means I protect it." She held his gaze and felt the triple beat in her chest, and this time she didn't fight it or analyze it or press her hand to her sternum. She just let it be what it was. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. They stayed on the battlements until the sun was fully gone and the stars were coming out, and when the cold got real, Mavis shifted to bat form once and looped out over the castle in a wide circle, just to move, and Naruto watched her from the battlement and felt the medallion warm against his skin and thought about his mother looking at his face once with all the love in the world. He put his hand flat on the stone of the battlements. Cold, ancient, enormous. His family had built this. His blood was in this rock. Below, Mavis landed back on the Merlin beside him and shifted back, hair slightly wild, cheeks flushed from the cold air. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Come on," she said. "I have to go talk to my dad." "Our dad," he said. She blinked. Looked at him. Something passed across her face that was large and soft and real. "Our dad," she repeated, quietly, trying it. "Yeah." She swallowed. "Yeah, okay." She stood. "Come with me?" He stood. "Yeah." They went back through the small door and down the narrow stair, and the castle closed around them both, and somewhere in the deep corridors of the hotel Count Aldrich sent a brief, careful message through channels that predated the postal system by 4 centuries, and the message arrived in a cold place and was read by cold eyes. "The boy is here. He is settled. He is not afraid." The reply came back in less than an hour, in a handwriting so precise it looked engraved. "Good. Let him settle. I want him comfortable before I introduce uncertainty." Chapter 4, What the Blood Remembers. It started small. 3 days after the conversation on the battlements, Naruto woke at 4 in the morning with his hands burning. Not painfully, or not quite painfully. It was more like the feeling of coming inside from severe cold, that deep cellular thaw, except running the wrong direction. Starting in his palms and moving up through his arms and into his chest, and underneath it a sound, or something that lived in the same part of him where sound lived, a low resonant hum, like a cello string bowed very slowly in a room with good acoustics. He sat up in bed and looked at his hands in the dark, and his hands looked entirely normal except for the way they were shaking, slightly, with something that wasn't fear. He sat with it for a while. Then it passed, and he went back to sleep, and in the morning he didn't mention it. 2 days after that he was in the courtyard with Wayne's cubs. They had adopted him with the comprehensive totality that small pack animals adopted new friendly presences, which meant they were simply around him now, orbiting, when one of them, the smallest, tumbled off the fountain ledge and caught a sharp corner on the way down. Naruto had crossed the 12 feet between them before he consciously processed moving. Not fast like a fast human. Fast like something else, the air displaced behind him, the cobblestones a blur for the half-second it took, and then he was kneeling with the cub in his hands, and the cub was fine, just startled, and all the other cubs had gone completely still. Wayne, from across the courtyard, said nothing. Just watched Naruto set the cub gently back on the fountain ledge with his eyebrows somewhere near his hairline. That was, Wayne started. I know, Naruto said. You weren't even looking at him. I know, he said again, and stroked the cub's ear once and stood up, and didn't look at his hands, and the hum in his chest slowly died down. That evening at dinner he reached for a candle to move it, and his fingers went through the flame without registering heat, and he pulled his hand back fast enough that nobody noticed except Elsa across the table, who noticed everything and said nothing. He went to Dracula's office after dinner. Knocked. Didn't wait for an answer. Something's happening, he said. Dracula looked up from his desk. Read Naruto's face in about a second and a half and stood. Describe it. Naruto described it, the burning in his hands, the speed, the fire. He laid it out plainly, no drama, just information. Dracula listened with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression doing rapid internal work. This is the blood activating, he said, when Naruto finished. Activating. You have lived 16 years as a human. Your body learned to be human because that was the context it had. Dracula chose his words with care, like a man who knew the wrong framing would matter. But you were never fully human. The vampire half of you was dormant, suppressed, not gone. And now you are here, in a place that is saturated with what you are, surrounded by your own kind, and it is, waking up, Naruto said. Yes. Naruto absorbed that. Can I control it? In time, yes. Absolutely. Dracula paused. Right now, probably not entirely. The early activation is, he searched for the word. Involuntary. Instinct-driven. Your body will respond to triggers before your mind has the chance to choose. What kind of triggers? Threat. Protectiveness. A slight pause. Strong emotion, of any kind. Naruto thought about the cub on the cobblestones. The 3 feet of air he'd crossed in something less than a second. Yeah. What happens if I lose control of it entirely? He asked. Dracula met his eyes. I won't allow that. That's not an answer. No, Dracula said, with the frankness of a man who had decided his son deserved directness. It is not. He sat on the edge of his desk. The full turn, the complete activation without control, it is not dangerous to you. But it can be overwhelming. Disorienting. You might not have access to fine judgment in that state. Instinct takes over entirely. He paused. It happened to me, once. A very long time ago. I do not recommend it. Okay. Naruto stood. So we train. Dracula blinked. Now? Is there a reason to wait? It is 9 o'clock in the evening and you have been here less than a week, and something is coming, Naruto said, and said it without alarm, just the plain fact of it. You said Vladimir will move. We both know Aldrich is watching. And right now I've got a power I can't control, which means I'm a liability. He looked at Dracula with the direct, uncomplicated gaze that Dracula was beginning to understand was just how his son looked at things, straight at them, no flinching. I don't like being a liability. Dracula looked at him for a moment. Then he stood. Change into something you don't mind ruining, he said. The training space was 3 levels below the hotel proper, cut into the mountain itself, stone walls, no windows, the air tasting faintly of mineral water and something electric. Torch brackets on the walls, a floor of compressed earth, the ceiling high enough that Dracula could move at full height and full speed without impediment. It was clearly not unused, the scuffs in the earth floor were deep and varied, the marks of long practice. How often do you come down here? Naruto asked, looking around. Every night, Dracula said, shedding his coat and draping it over a stone bench. Without exception. Even with the hotel running. Especially with the hotel running. He turned to face Naruto. This is not a lesson in the academic sense. I am not going to explain vampire abilities to you from a list. I am going to push you, and your blood is going to respond, and you are going to learn what that response feels like from the inside. He paused. Do you understand? Yeah. The goal is not control tonight. The goal is acquaintance. You need to know what you have before you can direct it. Sure, Naruto said, and dropped into a loose ready stance, easy and natural, and Dracula clocked the stance. It's a fighter's stance, he's been fighting for years, and something like grim satisfaction moved through him. He moved. Even knowing it was coming, even with the speed Naruto had been feeling in himself over the past few days, Dracula at full extension was something else. He crossed the chamber in a blink and Naruto went sideways, not quite fast enough, took a glancing impact on his left shoulder that should have knocked him down and instead just moved him. He rolled with it, came up on his feet, and the hum was already there in his chest, louder now, insistent. Dracula came again. This time Naruto ducked under it and something happened in his legs, not a decision but an event, and he launched off the floor at a height that surprised him, cleared Dracula's reach, came down on the other side and spun. His hands were burning again. Don't think, Dracula said. He was already moving. Don't analyze. Let it. Naruto moved. Really moved, for the first time, the thing that had been building since the cub on the cobblestones, since the fire at dinner, since the 4 in the morning burning in his hands. He covered the chamber in 2 steps that weren't quite steps and hit Dracula with both hands and Dracula caught them and they stayed there, pushing, and the pressure between them was enormous, not human enormous, something else, stone grinding, earth moving, and Dracula's eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second. They broke apart. Both breathing. Well, Naruto breathing. Dracula doing the motion of it out of habit. There you are, Dracula said, quietly. Something in his voice that wasn't the training register. Something private and briefly visible. What does that mean? Naruto asked. Your strength, Dracula said. It is, considerably more developed than I expected for a dormant activation. He was looking at Naruto with the look he sometimes got, the one that was measuring him against something internal. Have you always been strong? More than most people, Naruto said, honestly. I thought it was just you. Dracula nodded. Yes. It was never just you. He settled back into his stance. Again. They went for 2 hours. Not a spar exactly, more an excavation, Dracula probing and pushing and pulling back, Naruto responding and discovering, each exchange teaching him something new about what his body could do when it stopped pretending to be entirely human. The speed was the most disorienting, the way time seemed to stretch at the beginning of a fast movement, giving him room to read what was coming, react to things that should have been too quick to react to. The strength was less surprising, he'd always been strong, but the scale of it now was different, operating at a register that made his previous strength feel like a rough draft. The walls took some damage. Around the 90-minute mark, Naruto hit a wall with his fist instead of a blocking forearm, miscalculation, Dracula had fainted, and his fist went through the stone. Not crumbling through. Through, like the stone had briefly agreed to be less solid than usual. He pulled his hand back. Unmarked. They both looked at the hole in the wall. So, Naruto said. That, Dracula said carefully, should not be possible yet. And yet. Dracula looked at the hole with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral and was not entirely succeeding. Your activation is accelerating faster than a standard. I'm not standard, Naruto said. No, Dracula agreed. You are not. Naruto shook out his hand, still no pain, the burning had settled into a low constant warmth, and looked at the wall. Then looked at Dracula. What else is coming? In terms of abilities? In terms of abilities. Dracula listed them, clinical and direct, the speed and strength were already manifesting. The sensory enhancement, hearing, smell, the low-frequency awareness, had clearly been active for some time, which explained several things. The regeneration he probably already had and hadn't noticed because he'd never been seriously injured. The full shift, bat form, mist form, those would come, but later, once the base activation had settled. And the sunlight thing, Naruto said. Dracula paused. Yes. How bad is it? It is, another pause, the kind that meant choosing between honest and reassuring. It is uncomfortable. For a full vampire. He met Naruto's eyes. For you, half-human, we don't know. It may be less acute. You have spent 16 years in sunlight with no catastrophic effect. I'm a little sensitive to it, Naruto said, slowly. I thought it was just, I burn easily. I always wore, you were compensating without knowing you were compensating, Dracula said. Yes. He looked at his son. Tomorrow. We try sunlight exposure deliberately, in controlled conditions. We find the threshold. Not tonight? Tonight you sleep, Dracula said, in a tone that was not negotiable but also, unexpectedly, was slightly warm, the tone of a parent who had gone 17 years without being able to tell their child to sleep and was going to use it when available. Naruto recognized it. He let it be what it was. Fine, he said, picking up the shirt he'd taken off during the session. But we're doing this every night. Every night, Dracula agreed. He came out of the training level at just past midnight, following the staircase up through the hotel's lower levels, and Mavis was waiting in the corridor outside the staircase door with her back against the wall and her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had been waiting for a while and was not going to comment on it. She looked him over, the slight roughness of his hair, the faint luminescence in his eyes that was stronger now than it had been, the way he was carrying himself, which was the same as always but with something additional, something settled further into him. She noted the hole in the knee of his training pants where he'd hit the floor at one point. The walls took some damage, he said, preempting her. I could hear it from 2 floors up, she said. We'll fix the walls. The walls have survived a lot. She fell into step beside him toward the staircase. How was it? Good, he said. Then, more honestly, strange. Like finding rooms in your house you didn't know about. He paused. Rooms with a lot of furniture in them. She glanced at him sideways. Is it scary? Why does everyone keep asking me if I'm scared, he said, not annoyed, genuinely curious. Because most people would be, she said. Most people aren't me, he said, simply, and she thought about it and found she couldn't argue with the logic. They were on the 2nd floor landing when it happened. It wasn't triggered by anything dramatic, no threat, no sudden movement. Just Mavis, turning to say something, her foot catching an uneven flagstone, a small involuntary lurch forward. Naruto's arm was around her before either of them had processed the beginning of the fall, steadying her with a gentleness that was completely at odds with the force he'd been putting through stone walls 2 levels below 20 minutes ago. She found her feet and looked at him and he was looking at her with his hand still light on her arm and his eyes, those impossible ocean blue eyes, doing the luminescent thing at close range, which was different than it was from across a room. From across a room it was interesting. From here it was something that required a different word entirely. She was close. He was close. The corridor was lit by wall-mounted torches and the shadows moved. I was fine, she said. I know, he said. He didn't move his hand. Reflexes, she said. Yeah, he agreed. Neither of them moved. There was a moment, specific and real, the kind that doesn't announce itself but that you remember afterward with complete clarity, where the space between them had a quality to it, a held-breath quality, an almost. Then from the floor above came the sound of Wayne's cubs apparently having a collective crisis at midnight, a cascade of small howls and a large thump, followed by Wayne's exhausted voice saying something that rhymed with duck, and the moment broke into regular air again. Mavis stepped back. Her cheeks, pale as they were, had a faint color in them. She looked at the ceiling. The cubs, she said. The cubs, he agreed. I should, Mavis. He said her name the same way he always did, no inflation, no emphasis, just her name, but with the weight of someone who said names because they meant them. You should sleep. She looked at him. You should too. I will. He meant it. The training had reached something in him that was tired in a new way, a deep cellular tiredness that felt cleaner than ordinary exhaustion. She started up the stairs and then paused, one step up, and turned to look at him from the slight height advantage, and her hair fell forward and she pushed it back. Naruto. The eyes, she gestured at his face. They're doing the glow thing. He blinked. It's not bad, she said, quickly, and then seemed faintly annoyed at the quickness of it. It's fine. You should know, is all. She turned and went up the stairs. He stood in the second-floor landing and let out a slow breath and was very careful not to smile. He went to bed. He fell asleep in approximately 4 minutes, which was a record. He dreamed, not his usual light formless dreaming but something vivid and deep, and in the dream he was in the training room and the walls were whole and his hands weren't burning and Mavis was there sitting on the stone bench watching him with her chin in her hand and the small smile on her face and saying, "There you are," in the voice Dracula had used, and it meant something different and the same. He woke to sunlight coming through his window and his skin immediately telling him something was different. Not agonizing, but present. A sensitivity, like the difference between regular skin and skin that had been slightly sunburned, not pain exactly, but an awareness, a heightening. He lay in the sunlight for 30 seconds, assessing it, then got up and went to the window and put his hand fully in the beam coming through the glass. It was warm. Too warm, in a way that was now specific rather than general. He pulled his hand back before anything dramatic happened and looked at it. Fine. But the 30 seconds of assessment had told him something useful about where his threshold was. He dressed and went down to find Dracula. They spent an hour that morning in the courtyard, in the early sun, controlled, methodical, Dracula watching with the precision of someone taking measurements, Naruto moving in and out of shadow and sunlight in increments. What they established, full direct midday sun was going to be a problem. Morning and evening light was uncomfortable but manageable. With clothing covering most of his skin he could function without impairment. His face and hands were the most sensitive. Better than I expected, Dracula said. The human half, Naruto said. The human half is carrying significant weight, Dracula agreed, with a respect in his voice that was genuine. Your mother gave you that. Naruto was quiet for a moment. She gave me a useful thing, then. She gave you several, Dracula said. Frank came out of the hotel mid-morning while they were working and stood at a respectful distance watching, and when they paused he came forward and said, at careful volume, I could help. With the strength thing. I was assembled from parts. I understand the experience of a body that doesn't match your expectation of it. He put this forward with the genuine simplicity of a being who had no capacity for condescension because his own nature had required him to discard it entirely. I know what it's like to hit something and not know how hard you hit it. Naruto looked at him, this enormous gentle creature in his grill sergeant apron who cried at everything and spoke about his own constructed existence with complete openness, and felt something warm move through him that was simple and uncomplicated. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. Frank beamed with an intensity that briefly lit the courtyard. Dracula put his hand over his eyes, which was his version of an affectionate gesture. The afternoon was Frank's contribution, and it turned out to be exactly what Naruto needed. Where Dracula trained with elegant precision, Frank operated by feel, enormous and patient. He worked with Naruto on pure strength calibration, the two of them in the courtyard moving stones, bending iron fence rails back into shape after Naruto had bent them, testing his limits. Frank narrating his own experience of adjusting to unscalable force in a matter-of-fact way that made it possible for Naruto to hear without it becoming a whole thing. The trick, Frank said, holding a iron rail steady while Naruto worked it back into place, is not to try to be less strong. You try to be less strong and you just end up being strong accidentally. You have to be strong on purpose, all the way, and then you can choose the amount. That's weirdly good advice, Naruto said. I have a lot of weirdly good advice, Frank said, with satisfaction. He set down his end of the rail. Wanda says I should write it down, but I'm always worried I'll miss the tone. They worked until the sun was past its peak and the light was evening quality, warm and amber. Naruto's hands had settled, the burning was background now, present but not intrusive, something he was beginning to understand as just the new resting temperature of his blood. He bent a fence rail back into shape with one hand, slowly and deliberately, the iron moving like clay, and felt the difference between that and the involuntary explosive version from the training room wall, and it was the difference that Frank had described, accidental versus on purpose. He stood back and looked at the rail, straight and solid in the fence line. Then he turned and looked at the castle behind him, the towers rising into the evening clouds, and felt the warmth of the medallion against his chest where it now lived on a cord around his neck rather than in his pocket. Something on the battlements above caught his eye, a brief dark motion, there and gone. He looked at it directly and found nothing. But the low-frequency awareness at the back of his neck was awake and humming, a different quality than the training hum. Careful. Attentive. He kept his face relaxed. He went back to Frank. Who's on the Upper East battlement? He asked, conversationally. Frank looked up, the movement casual. Nobody this time of day, usually. Guests sometimes do the upper walk at dusk. He squinted. Why? No reason, Naruto said. He picked up another fence rail. But he filed it away, the figure on the battlement, too still for a sightseeing guest, too positioned in a line of sight to the courtyard. Watching the training. Taking stock. He worked with Frank until dinner and did not look at the battlement again. That night he found Mavis in the underground kitchen, alone, eating something cold from the refrigerator standing at the open door, which he suspected was a habitual late-night thing she didn't do when people were watching. She heard him on the stairs and didn't startle. She'd gotten accustomed to the way he moved, to the specific quality of his presence, faster than she would have expected and in a way she wasn't examining closely. There's actual food, he said, nodding at the refrigerator. I know, she said. I'm looking at it. He came and stood beside her and looked at the refrigerator. The thing on the second shelf. That's Frank's. He'll know if it moves. He won't. He always knows, she said, with the certainty of long experience. He reached past her and got it, leftover something, clearly good, and got 2 forks, and put it on the counter, and they stood at the kitchen counter at midnight eating Frank's thing, which was, she was right, excellent, and Frank was absolutely going to know it moved. How was training? She asked. Different this afternoon. Frank helped. Frank's good at the unexpected thing, she said. He seems like he'd be bad at it because he's so, but he's not. He's very intuitive. She paused. He loves you already, you know. Not in a performing it way. He genuinely does. I know, Naruto said. He did know. It was one of the cleanest things about the hotel, the way affection here was direct and unashamed, monsters not having the same social pressure toward emotional understatement that humans did. Mavis. What? Someone was on the Upper East battlement today. During training. Watching. She was still for a moment. What did they look like? Couldn't see. Too far, shadow positioned. But the way they were standing, not a guest. Something deliberate about the placement. She closed the refrigerator door and turned to face him, and the kitchen's warm light made her look serious and focused, the dreaminess entirely gone. Aldrich, she said. Or someone connected to him. He paused. I didn't confront it. I want to see if it happens again before I do anything. She was watching his face. You're not going to tell Dad right now. I'll tell him tomorrow. I want one more night of data. He met her eyes. You shouldn't mention it tonight either. Because he'll want to act immediately, she said. Because he'll want to act immediately, he confirmed. And acting on one data point when the other side has been thinking about this for longer than we have is bad strategy, she finished. Yeah. She looked at him for a long moment with the look she had, the one that was measuring something and had been consistently finding more than it expected. You've done this before, she said. The threat reading. The patience with it. My whole life, he said. I grew up in a place where people had complicated feelings about me. You learn to read rooms early when that's your context. He said it without self-pity, just information. It's useful now. She reached across and picked up her fork again. I hate that it was your context, she said quietly. I don't, he said. It made me who I am. A brief pause. I kind of like who I am. She looked at him with something that was warm and real and slightly helpless about it, the expression of someone who keeps finding things in a person they weren't expecting and has stopped being surprised by the finding and started being surprised by how much they don't want to stop. Yeah, she said softly. So do I. He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet around them, deep in the mountain, the stone cool and the light warm, and the hotel breathing above them with all its improbable life. His eyes were doing the luminescent thing again, which she'd stopped mentioning because she'd stopped thinking of it as a thing to note and started thinking of it as just how his eyes were, which was its own kind of development. She was close again. The kitchen counter between them but not much else. Mavis, he said. Don't, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Don't say something practical, she said, and the exasperation in her voice was the specific exasperation of someone who is fighting their own reaction to a situation. I know this is complicated and I know there's a lot happening and I'm not saying anything. She stopped. Pushed her hair back. Don't say something practical right now. He looked at her for a moment. I wasn't going to, he said. She looked at him. What were you going to say? That you have to look someone in the eye at the right time, he said. And the right time doesn't always come with clear conditions. He paused. That's it. She stared at him for a long moment and then looked away first, which she almost never did, and picked up her fork and focused on Frank's thing with great deliberateness. He watched her focus on Frank's thing and did not smile, carefully and with significant effort. He picked up his fork. The medallion was warm against his chest, and the hotel hummed around them, and somewhere on the Upper East battlement the shadow figure was gone, its report already traveling through old channels toward cold eyes and a patient mind. And Naruto sat in the underground kitchen at midnight and felt his blood moving differently in him than it had a week ago, not alien, not frightening, just more, like a river after rain, running at the full extent of its banks, and knew that whatever was coming, he was going to meet it with everything he had. Which was, it turned out, considerably more than anyone had measured yet. Chapter 5, Teeth and Tension Monster Fest had been a Hotel Transylvania tradition for longer than most of the attending monsters had been alive, which was saying something given the average lifespan in the room. It ran for 3 days every autumn: music, food, competitions, general celebration of existing in a world that mostly wanted you to not exist, and it drew guests from every corner of the monster world. The hotel filled to capacity. The corridors got loud. The ballroom ran all night. Frank cried at the opening ceremony every single year and had never once been embarrassed about it. This year it started on a Thursday. Naruto had been at the hotel for just under 3 weeks. He stood on the upper balcony overlooking the grand lobby on Thursday afternoon and watched the arrivals with his elbows on the railing and the medallion warm against his chest and the particular quality of attention he brought to crowded spaces, open, cataloging, nothing sliding past. Below him the lobby was a carnival. Witches arriving in groups, tall and short, traditional and contemporary. A family of river monsters who had to be directed to the larger ground floor rooms with reinforced floors. 3 separate mummy delegations who immediately got into a disagreement about seating precedents that Murray had to arbitrate, which he did with tremendous personal satisfaction. A pack of teenage vampires from a school somewhere in the Alps who arrived all at once and immediately scattered through the hotel like dropped marbles. The energy of the place was different during Monster Fest, looser, warmer, louder, the careful social management of ordinary hotel operation replaced by something more genuine and unguarded. Monsters who kept tight control of their nature in their daily lives, who navigated human-adjacent worlds with constant careful editing, arrived here and exhaled. Naruto could see it happening in real time, the way shoulders dropped, the way people's natural qualities came forward, the slight shift in the quality of the noise from polished to real. He found it, to his own mild surprise, moving. "You've been up here for an hour," Mavis said, appearing beside him. She had a way of appearing beside him that he'd stopped being surprised by and started just being glad about. "It's interesting. You say that about everything." "Because everything is," he said, which she considered and found she couldn't argue with. She leaned on the railing beside him and looked down at the lobby, and he was aware of her the way he was always aware of her now, the specific proximity of her, the warmth she carried, the night and moonlight quality of her that he'd started thinking of as her version of what she'd smelled in him, storm and ozone, paired things. He kept his eyes on the lobby. "The school group," he said, nodding at the scattering vampire teenagers. "Who runs it?" "A woman named Agatha. She's been running the Alpine school for about 60 years. Mavis looked. "She's good. Progressive. Her students are," she tilted her head, "more open than the old blood families. They don't care as much about lineage." "They're going to care about me," he said. Not arrogantly. Just practically. "Everyone's going to care about you," she said, with an honesty that was slightly wry. "You're Count Dracula's returned son. At Monster Fest. You might as well be a headline." "Aldrich's still here," he said. "I know." Her voice was level. They'd told Dracula about the battlement figure the morning after the kitchen, as agreed. Dracula had gone very still in the specific way he went still when he was containing a response that would otherwise be large and immediate, and then he'd said thank you to Naruto with a weight that meant more than the words, and he'd spent that day making quiet arrangements, additional awareness, subtle redistributions of who went where in the hotel. He had not confronted Aldrich directly. Naruto had asked him not to yet, and Dracula, after a long moment of visible effort, had deferred to that. It was the first time he'd deferred to Naruto on anything. They both knew it and neither mentioned it. "He brought 2 people with him," Naruto said. "They arrived this morning with the fest crowd. Registered as his cousins." He paused. "They're not his cousins." Mavis looked at him sideways. "How do you know?" "The way they move with him. Not family comfortable. Too precise." He straightened from the railing. "Also they smell wrong." "Wrong how?" "Like they've been somewhere cold and old for a long time." He turned to look at her. "The way old cellars smell. Stone and time." She was quiet for a moment. "Vladimir's people," she said. I think so. She held his gaze. The lobby noise swelled below them, someone starting up music somewhere off to the east, the first notes of something enormous and celebratory rolling through the stone corridors. Her jaw was set and her eyes were clear, and she looked like exactly what she was, Dracula's daughter, raised in this castle, who understood at a cellular level what it meant to have something she loved under threat. What do we do? We enjoy Monster Fest, he said. She stared at him. I'm serious, he said. We don't change anything we're doing. We don't signal that we've noticed. We let them think they're invisible and we find out what they're here to do. He held her gaze. The moment they know we've spotted them, they adapt. Right now we know more than they think we know, and that's worth more than confronting them tonight. She looked at him for a long moment with that measuring look. Then she breathed. Okay. Enjoy Monster Fest, Mavis, he said. She looked at the lobby, at the arriving crowds and the music and the particular bright strange life of her home at full capacity, and let herself actually look at it rather than through it. Okay, she said, and something in her expression softened. Okay, yeah. Come on. Monster Fest's opening night was genuinely one of the most extraordinary things Naruto had ever witnessed. The main ballroom ran with a band that had been playing together for 300 years and had incorporated every musical development of those centuries into something that shouldn't have worked but did, part big band, part something older, part something that had no human analog. Monsters danced with the complete unself-consciousness of people in a space where nobody was watching for the wrong things. The food tables ran the full length of the east wall and featured things Naruto couldn't identify and several he could and ate extensively. He moved through it all with his hands in his pockets and his eyes open and let the festival move around him. Wayne found him near the food tables around 9 and handed him something in a glass that turned out to be excellent. First Monster Fest? Wayne asked. First Monster Fest, Naruto confirmed. The second night's better, Wayne said. The first night everyone's still performing a little. By the second night they've relaxed. He looked around the ballroom with the satisfaction of a man who had been coming here for many years and had his opinions about it. Third night is when it gets actually insane. In a good way. I'll note that, Naruto said. He was tracking Aldrich's 2 arrivals peripherally. They'd separated, one near the ballroom entrance, one near the far exit, a positioning that was natural-looking and thoroughly deliberate. Wayne. How long have you known Aldrich? Wayne's easy expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Long enough to not trust him completely. He took a drink. He was always a traditionalist. Comes every year. Never causes actual trouble. He paused. Never brought extra guests before. You noticed too. I have excellent smell, Wayne said, mildly. The cousin's story is garbage. He looked at Naruto. You've already told Drac. Yeah. And he's waiting, Naruto said. For now. Wayne absorbed that, nodded slowly. You're running this one. Naruto glanced at him sideways. He is. He told me this morning he was deferring to you on the Aldrich situation. Wayne shrugged one massive shoulder. He's never deferred to anyone on hotel security in 40 years. So. He didn't say the rest. He just looked at Naruto with the yellow eyes and the frank appraisal of someone whose survival instincts were extremely well calibrated. Don't let them pick the ground. I won't, Naruto said. Wayne nodded. Moved off toward a table where 3 of his cubs were about to do something inadvisable with the dessert display. Naruto found Mavis on the dance floor at 10, which he did not plan but which the evening arranged naturally. She was dancing with Elsa and 2 of the Alpine schoolgirls, easy and loose, the controlled careful quality she sometimes carried entirely absent, and she looked like herself in a way that was different from the battlements and the roof and the kitchen, open, bright, taking up the space she was in. She saw him at the edge of the floor and tilted her head in an obvious invitation. He went. He danced the same way he moved through everything, unself-consciously, without performing it, and she danced beside him and the band did something slow and large and the ballroom turned around them in warm amber light. She was close again, the way she kept ending up close, and he thought about the kitchen counter and the second floor landing and the way she'd said don't say something practical. This is good, he said. It is, she agreed, and she was looking at him, and the ballroom moved around them and neither of them was looking at it. Mavis. He said her name. Don't, she said again, but this time her voice was different, not the kitchen counter version, not keeping something at arm's length. The different version. The one that was asking him to wait not because she didn't want to but because she wasn't quite ready and wanted to choose her own timing, and he understood the difference between those things because she was that kind of person and he'd been paying attention. I know, he said. She looked at him and the small not-planned smile happened, and then the 3-beat happened in her chest, and then the ballroom shifted around them because the music changed to something faster, and Elsa reappeared and pulled Mavis sideways, and Naruto stepped back and watched her go and did not mind waiting because he understood that the right time was coming and that some things were worth getting the timing right on. It happened at 11:30, when the ballroom was at full roar and the corridors were thick with moving guests and the hotel was at maximum beautiful chaos. Naruto felt it before he heard it, the low-frequency awareness at the back of his neck spiking hard, not the gentle hum of training or the careful attention of threat reading, but the full-volume alarm of something happening now. He was at the ballroom edge when it hit and he was moving through the crowd before he'd identified the direction, letting the awareness navigate because it was faster than thought. The sound reached him half a second later, not a crash, not a scream, something stranger. A deep resonant pulse, felt more than heard, that made the torches in the corridor flicker and the guests nearest the east wing stop dancing and look around with the specific animal alertness of creatures who recognized wrongness in their environment. Naruto was in the east corridor in 4 seconds. It opened into the guest wing, a long stone passage with rooms branching off either side, and at its far end the door to the service staircase was open, which it shouldn't have been, and through it came a quality of cold air that was wrong for the season and the altitude. One of Aldrich's arrivals was at the far end of the corridor. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was standing in the open with the cold air behind him and his face unmasked, not the careful hotel guest presentation but the real thing underneath, the face of someone who had stopped pretending. Older than he'd appeared. Much older. The kind of old that vampires carried differently than humans did, not in their face but in the quality of their stillness, the way they occupied space. He was looking directly at Naruto. In his hand was a small device, not technological, older than that. A stone disc etched with patterns that radiated something Naruto could feel in his teeth, a frequency that was specifically, deliberately unpleasant, calibrated for the vampire's sensory register. Around them in the corridor, 3 of the nearest guests, 2 witches and a young vampire from the Alpine school, had gone to their knees, hands over their ears, the pulse from the device hitting their nervous systems like a frequency weapon. Naruto looked at the guests on the floor. Looked at the device. Looked at the man holding it. Something happened in his chest. Not the training hum or the low-frequency awareness. This was different. This was older and simpler and ran on a frequency below thought, the thing that happened when something he considered his was being hurt. He crossed the corridor. Not at the speed he'd shown in training, faster. The stone floor blurred. The man with the device had half a second of real surprise on his face before Naruto's hand closed around the device and squeezed, and the etched stone disc became etched stone fragments, and the resonant pulse cut off like a wire snapped clean. The corridor went quiet. Naruto was standing 3 inches from the man with the disc fragments in his closed fist and his eyes doing the luminescent thing at a brightness that was new, not the soft background glow that Mavis had mentioned, but something active and direct, the kind of light that came from somewhere with pressure behind it. The man stared at him. "The guests," Naruto said. His voice was level. Not loud. Level, which was more frightening. "You hurt the guests." "The disc wasn't," the man started. "Calibrated for everyone, I know." Naruto looked at the witches and the alpine student helping each other up from the floor. It got everyone in range anyway. He looked back at the man. That bothers me. You should come with us, the man said, and his voice was doing the thing that very old vampires could do, the subsonic persuasion layer underneath the words, the compulsion frequency. Quietly. Before this becomes a scene. Naruto looked at him with an expression that was not aggressive, not performed, not the face of someone managing a situation. The expression of someone who found the situation straightforward. That's not happening, he said. And you should know that compulsion doesn't work on me. He paused. I don't know if that's the half-human thing or just me. But it doesn't work. You can feel that it's not working right now. The man could feel it. It was visible in his face, the specific confusion of someone whose primary tool had found no purchase. His eyes moved to the disc fragments in Naruto's hand, then to Naruto's eyes, then to the corridor behind Naruto where the noise from the ballroom continued as if nothing had happened, because the east corridor was far enough that it hadn't reached there yet. Where is the other one? Naruto asked. Your partner. The man said nothing. Roof access, said Mavis, from the corridor entrance. Naruto turned. She was there, having come from the ballroom direction, and she was not in the form she'd been in on the dance floor, not dancing loose, not easy. She was focused in a way that had weight to it, and her eyes had the quality that vampire eyes had when the social layer was down and the nature was up. She was looking past Naruto at the man with the focused assessment of someone who had grown up as the daughter of the most powerful vampire alive and had inherited, along with everything else, the particular quality of not being afraid of things that should be frightening. He went to the roof. I saw him on the stairs. She looked at Naruto. He had something too. Same device or different? Naruto asked. Different shape, she said. Bigger. Naruto turned back to the man in the corridor. He held up the disc fragments in his open hand, then let them fall. They hit the stone floor and scattered. He looked at the man with the level eyes and the steady voice and said, Who sent you? I already know the answer. I want to hear you say it. The man's jaw was set. Centuries of loyalty and discipline held in his face. Okay, Naruto said. He looked at Mavis. Keep him here. Don't let him shift. He paused. Or let him shift. Either way, he's not going anywhere. I can handle one ancient vampire, she said, with the dry precision of someone who had grown up in a castle full of ancient vampires and had been trained by the most powerful one. I know you can, he said, and went for the stairs. The roof was cold and wind-scoured, the monster fest noise muffled below, the sky overhead enormous and deep with stars. The second man was at the far end of the battlements, not the east battlement where the shadow figure had been during training, but the north face, positioned above the main entrance, and in his hands was the larger device Mavis had described. It wasn't a sonic disc. It was something else, a crystalline structure, roughly the size and shape of a large lantern, that was currently active, emanating something Naruto could feel on the back of his neck like approaching lightning. A disorientation field. Broader range. Designed not for targeted incapacitation but for general disruption, confusion, sensory overload, dropped defenses. An opener. Naruto put it together in about 2 seconds on the roof stairs. They'd split deliberately, the disc in the east corridor to create a distraction and pull response while the real device went up here, above the main entrance, to hit the ballroom full of guests when they eventually came out or when someone opened the main doors. Not an attack. An opener. This was reconnaissance and destabilize, not assault. They were here to get a reading and compromise the hotel's defensive readiness. Probably while someone, Vladimir, or someone with access to Vladimir's intelligence, measured the response. He stepped onto the roof. The man turned immediately. He had the crystalline device in both hands and it was fully active, and at this range Naruto could feel it pressing at his perception, trying to find the edges of his awareness and blur them. He let it press. It found nothing to blur. His eyes went luminescent without him deciding to, the active brightness again, and the wind moved around him and he walked across the roof with his hands at his sides and his face completely calm. "Put it down," he said. The man did not put it down. He raised it, both hands, directed it at Naruto point blank at a range where it should have been absolutely overwhelming, and activated it at full output. Naruto walked through it. Not without effort, he could feel it, a pressure like walking against strong current, a weight on his senses that was real and deliberate and powerful. But he walked through it the same way he walked through everything, because the thing the device was trying to find in him, the doubt, the uncertainty, the edges of a self that could be blurred, those things weren't there. He knew who he was. He'd known who he was since the alley in Konoha. The device needed purchase and he wasn't giving it any. He took the crystalline structure out of the man's hands with the same gentle completeness with which he'd taken the disc. The man resisted and Naruto's grip didn't change, just maintained the pressure with the certainty of something that wasn't going to move regardless of the force applied, and after 3 seconds the man let go. Naruto turned the device over in his hands. Looked at it. The crystalline structure was sophisticated, old craft, careful making, not something assembled quickly. Someone had made this with time and intention. He looked at the etching on its base, the same script as the medallion's inscription, the language he almost knew. He looked up at the man. "Tell Vladimir," he said, and his voice was quiet enough that the wind almost took it, "that I know he's watching. And that I'm going to come find him eventually. He doesn't need to send people." He paused. "But if he sends people again, I'm going to be less polite about it." The man stared at him. "You can go now," Naruto said. Below, in the east corridor, Dracula arrived 40 seconds after Mavis had contained Aldrich's man with an efficiency that the man had clearly not anticipated, and Dracula looked at the situation, Mavis composed, the ancient vampire thoroughly unable to move, the disc fragments on the floor, and then looked at his daughter with an expression that was complicated and proud and slightly chagrined at the proud, because she'd done this herself with no assistance. "He's on the roof," she told him, before he could ask. "Alone?" "He said he'd handle it," she said, and there was something in her voice when she said that Dracula clocked and filed for later examination. On the roof, Naruto watched Vladimir's man go, shifted to mist form and dispersed off the battlements, carrying the message or not, but gone. He held the crystalline device and looked out at the mountains, the monster fest noise rising from below, the hotel alive and full and loud. The medallion was warm against his chest. He thought about Vladimir's cold precise handwriting. Let him settle. I want him comfortable before I introduce uncertainty. He thought about the battlement figure during training and the timing of Aldrich's extra guests arriving with the fest crowd and the split operation tonight, a probe, not an attack, intelligence gathering dressed as disruption. Vladimir was building a picture. He wanted to know what Naruto was before he moved. He wanted to understand the shape of what he was dealing with. Naruto let himself be looked at. He looked back. He went back downstairs. Dracula was in the corridor with Mavis and 3 others, Frank, Wayne, Griffin, who had materialized at the first sign of trouble with the quiet solidarity of people who had been doing this for decades. The ancient vampire was sitting against the wall looking resigned. The disc fragments were still on the floor. Naruto handed Dracula the crystalline device. "Reconnaissance and disorientation opener," he said. The disc was the distraction. This was the real tool. Aimed at the main entrance, timed for when the ballroom empties. He looked at Dracula. He has access to old craft. This isn't improvised. Someone made this specifically. Dracula was looking at the device with a recognition that Naruto could read, not seeing it for the first time, knowing what it was, knowing who made things like this. He looked at Naruto. "You walked through an active disorientation field. It needed purchase," Naruto said. "I didn't give it any. Frank made a sound that he immediately tried to muffle and was not entirely successful at muffling. Wayne looked at the ceiling. Griffin's floating glasses tilted at an angle that suggested raised eyebrows. Dracula looked at his son for a moment with the expression that Naruto was beginning to understand was the expression for things Dracula didn't have clean words for: too large, too mixed, the compound emotion of a man rediscovering someone he'd thought was gone. "The guests," Naruto said, moving on. "The witches and the Alpine kid in the corridor, they took some hit from the disc. Make sure they're okay." "Already handled," Wayne said. "Wanda's with them." "They're fine, just rattled." "Good." Naruto looked at the ancient vampire against the wall. "What do you want to do with him?" Dracula looked at the man with an expression that was controlled and cold in the way that thousand-year-old power was cold when it chose to be. "He and Count Aldrich will leave the festival tonight," he said, and the way he said it made leave sound like the diplomatic version of something more permanent. "Under escort." He looked at Naruto. "Unless you have an objection." "No," Naruto said. "But tell Aldrich exactly what happened. All of it. I want Vladimir to know what we found and what we took." He nodded at the crystalline device in Dracula's hand. "Let him recalibrate with accurate information." Dracula looked at him for a moment. "You are giving him the message you gave the man on the roof." "I already gave it to the man on the roof," Naruto said. "But redundancy is useful." Frank made the muffled sound again. This time Wayne made a version of it. Griffin's floating glasses tilted further. "Go enjoy the festival," Naruto said to them, and there was something in the way he said it, the ease of it, the command underneath the ease, that moved through the corridor and settled. He turned to Mavis. She was looking at him with the measuring look, but it was doing something different now, had been doing something different since she'd appeared at the corridor entrance and he'd turned and found her there, not new information exactly, but information arriving with new force. She'd watched him walk out of the east corridor and up the stairs alone with an active intelligence device in the hands of a centuries-old vampire, and she'd felt something in her chest that was larger than the triple beat, something with more range to it, that she was going to have to spend some time with. "The festival," he said. "The festival," she agreed. They went back to the ballroom. The band was still playing. The lights were still warm and amber. The monsters were still dancing with the gorgeous unself-consciousness of creatures in a safe space. It looked exactly as it had an hour ago, which was the point, which was what the hotel was supposed to be. Naruto stood at the ballroom entrance and watched it and felt the medallion against his chest and the warmth of his blood moving at its new temperature, the Fullbanks River, and thought about Vladimir recalibrating with accurate information. Good. Mavis stood beside him and their arms were close enough to be almost touching, and neither of them moved to change that. Below them, Frank found Wanda and put his enormous arm around her, and she leaned into him and looked across the ballroom at Naruto and Mavis and said something quietly that made Frank make the sound he'd been making all evening, not muffled this time, just open and simple and glad. Wayne, passing them with a cub under each arm, heard it and grinned. Murray straightened from the table where he'd been watching and said, in the voice like sand on stone, "The stars said this too." And for once nobody told him to stop. Chapter 6, The Brother in the Dark. 3 days after Monster Fest ended, Vladimir came himself. Not in person, not yet, but in a way that was almost worse. He came as a letter, delivered by a bat that was not one of the castle's bats, that arrived at Dracula's window at 3 in the morning and sat on the sill until Dracula, who did not sleep but who had been sitting in his office in the specific stillness of a man running calculations, noticed it and took the small roll of paper from its leg. He read it once. Then he sat down, which he hadn't been planning to do, and read it again. Naruto found him like that at 4 in the morning when the low-frequency awareness pulled him out of a deep sleep and down the corridors to the office without him making a conscious decision to go. He knocked once, opened the door, took one look at Dracula's face, and closed the door behind him. "He wrote," Naruto said. Dracula held out the letter. Naruto took it. The handwriting was exactly as he'd imagined from the intelligence report, precise, engraved quality, the penmanship of someone who had been writing with absolute control for so long that the control had become the handwriting rather than applied to it. He read it twice, the way Dracula had. "Brother, I understand the boy has come home. I understand also that you have been keeping him very busy, training, orientation, the particular domestication of someone wild. How like you. You always preferred to sand things smooth. I have no interest in a confrontation. I have never had interest in confrontation as an end in itself. That was always your assumption about me, and it was always wrong. What I have interest in is a conversation. A real one. The kind we have not had in some time. The boy is remarkable. My people tell me this. I believe them. Which is precisely why this conversation matters, not to you and me, but to what he is, what he represents, and what the world will make of him whether we choose it or not. Come to the valley below the eastern pass. Come alone. 3 nights from now. You know I am right that this is necessary. You know I am right about most things. That has always been the problem between us." Naruto set the letter on the desk. He looked at it. "He's not asking you to bring me. No. He's asking you to come alone." He paused. "Which is the tell?" Dracula looked at him. "He doesn't want to meet me yet," Naruto said. "He wants to meet you first. He wants to read what you know about him, how much I've told you, whether you're frightened, whether you've changed." He tapped the letter with one finger. "I am right about most things. That has always been the problem between us. He's already doing it. Framing the dynamic. Setting himself as the rational party, you as the reactive one." He paused. "He's very good at this. He is centuries better at it than most things that exist," Dracula said, and said it without false modesty, just the plain assessment of someone who had known his brother for a very long time and was not going to underestimate him. "Are you going to go?" Naruto asked. Dracula was quiet for a moment. "I am considering it." "What would it cost you?" Naruto asked. "Not should you, not don't. Just the operational question." "Information," Dracula said. "He would see me and know things from the seeing. He would know whether I am afraid. He would know whether you being here has changed my judgment." A pause. "He is very good at reading what people do not say." "What would you gain?" "The same things," Dracula said. "In reverse." He looked at his son. "I have not seen him in decades. He has changed, presumably. People who believe they are right for a very long time become a particular shape. I would want to know what shape he has become." "Then go," Naruto said. Dracula looked at him steadily. "He said to come alone." "I know," Naruto said. "You are not going to argue with that?" "I'm not going to come with you," Naruto said. "That's not the same as not arguing with it." He held Dracula's gaze. "He doesn't want to meet me yet. That's useful. Use that. Go, see what shape he's in, see what he actually wants, and come back with real information." He paused. "You don't need me there for that. You've been reading him for 1,000 years. Dracula was looking at him with the expression, the one for things too large and too compound to name cleanly. "You trust me to do this?" "You're the only person alive who actually knows him," Naruto said. "Yeah. I trust you to do this." Something settled in Dracula's face. Not relief, something older and less negotiated than relief. The particular quality of someone who has spent a long time managing alone and has just been handed, without ceremony, the weight of a partner. "I will go," he said. "Good." Naruto picked up the letter and rolled it back up. "Don't tell him anything about what I can do. He already knows the shape of it, his people saw the training, they had the fest. But he doesn't know the extent. Let him keep thinking I'm a work in progress. Dracula took the letter back. "Are you?" he asked, with something dry in his voice that was new, the dry register of someone who had started to feel safe enough to be slightly funny about things. "Tell him yes," Naruto said, and went back to bed. The next 2 days had a different quality. The hotel had returned to its regular rhythm after Monster Fest, the guest count settling back to normal, the corridors regaining their habitual quieter energy. But underneath the normalcy was something taut, not fear, more like the particular tension of a bow that has been drawn and not yet released. The inner circle knew about the letter. Frank had gone quiet in the specific way Frank went quiet when he was genuinely worried, which was its own kind of alarming because Frank's noise was the baseline. Wayne moved through the hotel with his hackles permanently at 3/4. Griffin kept showing up in rooms he had no particular reason to be in. Mavis was the most interesting to watch, because Mavis was doing the exact opposite of what Naruto expected. Instead of tension, she had gone focused, a clean, directed focus, no waste in it. She spent the 2 days before Dracula's meeting quietly and systematically learning the hotel's every defensive position, testing her own shifting speed, asking Wayne questions about old blood vampire combat styles with the directness of a student who had decided to become very good at something very quickly. Naruto found her in the training room the first morning, alone, working through a sequence of shifts, human to bat to mist to human, with a repetition and precision that spoke to hours already put in before he arrived. He sat on the stone bench and watched without commenting. After 10 minutes she stopped, breathing hard, and looked at him. "Say something useful or don't say anything. Your mist to human transition loses about half a second," he said. "You're deciding it instead of committing it." She looked at him. "Show me." He didn't have the full shift yet. Dracula had said it would come but wasn't there yet, but he had enough of the change in him to demonstrate the commitment part, the difference between a body that was deciding and a body that had already decided and was simply executing. He showed her with movement instead, a pivot drill, the difference between telegraphing and committing, and she watched with the intense attention she brought to things that mattered to her and then tried it. The half-second disappeared. "There," he said. She tried it 3 more times. "Clean each time." She breathed. "What else?" "You telegraph the initial shift with your shoulders," he said. "You tighten them first. In a real situation that's a tell." She tried it without the shoulder tightening. It took 6 attempts to break the habit but she broke it, which told him something about the quality of her focus. She had the kind of attention that could locate a deeply grooved physical habit and manually override it, which was rare and not teachable. "Where did you learn to fight?" she asked, between attempts. "Everywhere," he said, honestly. "The village I grew up in, there were people there who trained hard. I got into it early because I needed somewhere to put the energy." He paused. "And because I was fast and strong in ways I didn't understand and I needed to know what that meant." "Did you ever lose?" "Yes." He said it with the simplicity of someone who had no investment in the other answer. "A lot, at first. I was strong but I didn't know what I was doing. Strength without craft is just noise." He thought about it. "Losing was the most useful thing that happened to me. I learned more from every loss than I did from every win." She was looking at him in the way she had when she'd said "so do I" in the kitchen. The look that kept finding more than it expected. "You're the least arrogant strong person I've ever met," she said. "I'm not modest about it either," he said. "I know what I can do." "I know," she said. "That's the difference." She paused. "Most people who are strong like you, whatever the type, they either hide it or they perform it. You just have it," he said. "Have it," she agreed. "Like it's just a fact. Like your height." She tilted her head. "It makes people trust you." "Does it?" he said. She looked at him. "I trust you," she said, and it was so plainly and directly said that it didn't require any response and he didn't give one, just held her gaze and let it be what it was, real and mutual and growing roots. They spent the rest of the morning in the training room, and it shifted from instruction to something more collaborative, each of them pushing the other, Naruto learning the specific qualities of her combat style, which was quick and precise and used the environment with an intelligence that came from 16 years of knowing every inch of the castle ground, and Mavis learning from him the way of meeting force rather than evading it, the difference between getting out of the way and standing in the path of something and redirecting it. By the time Frank appeared in the doorway at noon looking for them, they were breathing hard and talking through an exchange they'd just run and both pointing out things the other had missed, the easy back and forth of people who had found their working frequency. Frank stood in the doorway and looked at them and made the muffled sound. "Frank," Mavis said. "I'm not saying anything," Frank said. He clearly had a lot to say. Lunch. Dracula left for the Eastern Pass on the third evening, 2 hours after sunset. He came to find Naruto before he left, which Naruto hadn't expected. He came to the training room where Naruto was working alone, an hour of daily practice that had become fixed, and stood in the doorway until Naruto stopped and looked at him. He was dressed for travel, dark and practical, stripped of the hotel host presentation he typically wore like a second skin. He looked, Naruto thought, like the man in the tapestry, the 400 years ago version, before the hotel and the grief and the careful management. Older than that portrait, obviously. But with the same quality underneath, something that had been present before everything else was built on top of it. "I should be back before dawn," Dracula said. "I know." Naruto picked up his water, drank. "What do you want me to do if you're not?" "Wait until midday," Dracula said. "Not before. Do not move before midday. That is not a concession to caution, it is strategy. Vladimir will expect a fast reaction and have something prepared for it. Midday gives you hours he won't have accounted for." "Midday," Naruto said. He looked at his father. "Be honest with him." Dracula raised an eyebrow. "Not about what I can do," Naruto clarified. "About you. About what you've built here, what you believe, what the hotel means. Don't manage him the way you manage guests. He'll read the management. Be honest and let him decide what to do with it." A pause. "He said you always preferred to sand things smooth. So be rough." Dracula was quiet for a moment. "When did you become the one giving strategy?" "When you started listening," Naruto said. Something moved in Dracula's face that was compound and large and visible for a full 2 seconds before he contained it. He looked at his son, this boy who had walked in out of the dark 3 weeks ago with a medallion and a grin and proceeded to take root in the castle like something that had always been meant to grow here, who trained every night and read every room and loved the hotel's people with the easy directness of someone who had made his choices and wasn't going back on them. "I will be back before dawn," Dracula said again. The repetition meant something different the second time. "I know," Naruto said. "Go." Dracula went. The castle felt different with him gone. Not diminished, the hotel ran perfectly well, it always did, the staff and the monsters and the rhythms of the place were not dependent on his physical presence. But there was a quality to the air, a slight adjustment in the atmosphere, the way a room changed when its most significant object was moved. Naruto felt it and set it aside and went upstairs to find Mavis. She was on the roof. Of course she was. He was beginning to think the roof was her emotional barometer. When things were ordinary she was in the hotel's living spaces, but when something was large she went up, as if altitude helped her think. He came through the small door and found her at the battlements with her arms on the stone and the night around her, and she heard him come and didn't turn. He put his arms on the stone beside her. They looked at the mountains together. "He'll be okay," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not worried about that." A pause. "I'm worried about what Vladimir says to him." "What do you mean?" "Vladimir is persuasive," she said. "He has been practicing on my father for 1,000 years. He knows he knows how to get in. The right angles. The grief, the guilt, the things my dad still, the things he's never fully resolved. She exhaled. He's going to use everything. Yes, Naruto said. And Dracula knows that. Knowing doesn't always protect you from it. No, he agreed. But you know what does? She looked at him sideways. Having something to come back to, he said. Something Vladimir can't get to. Your dad has the hotel, he has you, he paused. He has me. Vladimir has been working on isolated grief for a long time. That's not what he's walking into tonight. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the mountains and he saw her shoulders settle slightly, not in resignation but in the small physical release of someone who has let themselves believe something they'd been holding at arm's length. Tell me about Vladimir, she said. What you've worked out. He leaned on the stone and talked through it, not reading from notes, just laying out the picture he'd assembled since the letter, since Dracula's history, since the behavior of the Fest operatives. Vladimir believed in his cause with the genuine conviction of someone who had never been persuaded he was wrong about it, which made him more dangerous than a cynical man because conviction didn't negotiate. He was patient, centuries patient, the kind of patience that came from being confident in the eventual outcome and being willing to wait for the right conditions. He was intelligent and he was proud, and pride, in someone that intelligent, was the most exploitable thing about him. He thought he was the rational one. He thought he was the one who saw clearly while everyone around him reacted emotionally. That belief, that certainty of his own clarity, was the edge. He thinks ideology is logic, Naruto said. He's been confusing those two things for so long he can't see the gap between them anymore. Mavis was quiet for a moment. How do you fight that? You make him react, Naruto said. You make the patient man feel something urgent. You make the man who thinks he's clear see that he's been blind. He paused. Not by telling him. By showing him. In a situation where he can't manage the framing. She looked at him. A situation like a direct confrontation. Yeah. When he comes here, she said. When he comes here, he agreed. She turned to face the mountains again and they stood together in the cold night air, and after a while she said, quietly, not looking at him, I've been thinking about what you said. In the kitchen. He waited. About the right time and looking someone in the eye, she said. The wind moved her hair. I've been thinking that I've been waiting for conditions that aren't going to get cleaner than this. A pause. There's an ancient enemy coming and my dad is meeting his brother in a valley and the hotel is, she stopped. Started again. There's never going to be a quiet moment. This is what life is here. This is the life. Yeah, he said. So. She turned and looked at him, and the look was direct and honest and without the careful management she sometimes used to hold things at bay. The full look, unedited. I'm looking at you at the right time. He looked back at her. The luminescent quality was in his eyes, low and steady, the resting temperature of his blood finding its expression, and the night was cold and wide and the mountains were enormous in the dark, and he thought about the inscription on the medallion, "You are found wherever you go," and understood it differently now than he had when Dracula first told him what it said. He reached up and tucked her wind-moved hair back, and his hand was warm against her face from the blood temperature warmth he ran at now, and she leaned into it just slightly, just enough. I know, he said, and his voice was quiet but certain, the same certainty he brought to everything. This is my home, I like who I am, I don't need to be afraid of anything, turning now towards something more specific and more necessary. They stayed on the roof for a long time after that, close and quiet, with the night around them and the hotel below them and somewhere to the east, Dracula was walking into a valley to face his brother with the truth. Dracula came back at 3 in the morning. Naruto heard him arrive from 2 floors up, the quality of his footstep different, heavier than usual, the particular weight of someone carrying a conversation they hadn't put down yet. He gave him 5 minutes and then went to the office. Dracula was standing at the window. He had not turned on any lights. He stood in the moonlight with his hands behind his back, and when Naruto came in he spoke without turning. "He looks the same," Dracula said. "That is the strangest part. 1,000 years and he looks exactly the same." A long pause. "He was sitting at a fire when I arrived. He had wine. He offered me wine. We sat at a fire in the valley and talked like we were 20 years old arguing about philosophy. His voice was careful and strange. He is still my brother." "What did he say?" Naruto asked. Dracula turned. He looked, not damaged, not broken, but shaken in the deep way that only the oldest things could be shaken, disturbed at the foundations. He said the hotel is a beautiful lie. He said I have built a sanctuary for monsters to practice pretending to be small, and that I have taught an entire generation of our kind to make themselves less in service of a peace that the human world will never actually honor. He paused. And then he said he wants Naruto. The room was very still. "Not dead," Dracula continued, quickly. "He was very clear about that. He wants you alive and he wants you on his side. He believes, genuinely, I think, that if the heir to the Dracula bloodline could be shown what the world actually is, what it does to monsters who lower their defenses, who trust, who believe in coexistence, he thinks you would understand his position." His jaw tightened. "He thinks you are unconvinced, not converted. He thinks you haven't been shown enough of the world yet to know he's right. And he wants to be the one to show me," Naruto said. "Yes. What did you tell him?" Dracula met his eyes. "I told him that you had already seen the world. That you had grown up in it. That you knew precisely what it did and did not do to people it didn't understand." He paused. "I told him you were not unconvinced. You were simply not wrong." Naruto was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. Dracula stopped. "What?" "He said I was letting sentiment cloud my assessment. He said I was seeing what I wanted to see in you because I had been grieving you for 16 years and I would believe anything rather than examine you honestly." His voice was level but tight underneath it. "He said loving someone was a form of blindness, and that I had never been able to see the people I loved as they actually were." The office was quiet. Outside, the mountains were dark and enormous. "He mentioned your mother," Dracula said, very quietly. "He knows things about her death things I did not know he knew. He has been watching for longer than I thought." "Is that what shook you?" Naruto asked. Not accusing. Asking the real thing. Dracula was silent for a long moment. "He said I lost her because I insisted on a world where we could be loved by what cannot love us back. He said she died for a philosophy." His voice was flat in the way that flatness was the only alternative to something much larger. "He said you were the same, that I was sending you down the same path, and that when you were taken from me the first time, that was the world showing me the truth of itself, and I refused to read it." Naruto crossed the room and sat in the chair by the fire. "Dracula." Dracula looked at him. "He's telling you a story where everything that hurt you proves his point," Naruto said. "Every loss becomes evidence. Every grief becomes an argument." He held his father's gaze. "That's not philosophy. That's manipulation with a philosophical vocabulary." Dracula breathed, the habit of it, the motion without the need. "Your wife didn't die because the world is irredeemable," Naruto said. "She died because one human did one terrible thing. That's a true statement. But Vladimir has been taking true statements and building false conclusions from them for centuries, and you know that, and he knows you know it, and he came at you with it anyway because he needed to see if the grief was still an open door." Dracula was very still. "Is it?" Naruto asked. The question sat in the air between them, clean and direct, the kind of question that only worked because the person asking it wasn't afraid of the answer. Dracula looked at his son for a long moment. Then something happened in his face, a loosening, a depth, the release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. No, he said. It is not. He said it with the tone of a discovery, which it partly was, the confirmation of a thing you suspected but had not said aloud to anyone who could make it real by hearing it. It is not an open door. Naruto nodded. Good. He will come here, Dracula said. He told me he would. Not yet, he wants time for his message to work on me, I think, time for doubt to develop. He does not know you were the one waiting up. A slight pause that contained something. He will be surprised by that. Let him be, Naruto said. He stood. Get some sleep. Or whatever you do instead. Dracula looked at him. Naruto. He stopped at the door. He asked me one question, Dracula said, that I could not answer cleanly. He asked me whether I believed you would stay. Whether, once you understood fully what you were and what you could do, you would choose to stay in a hotel. He paused. He said people with real power do not choose to be small. Naruto turned and looked at his father, and the fire threw orange light across his face and his eyes were steady and deep and completely without uncertainty. I'm not staying because I'm choosing to be small, he said. I'm staying because this is mine and I protect what's mine. He held Dracula's gaze. Those are not the same thing. Vladimir's going to find that out. He went back to his room. The medallion was warm against his chest all the way up the stairs. And in the valley below the eastern pass, at the remains of a fire, Vladimir Dracula sat in the dark and turned the information from the evening over in his long, cold, brilliant mind, and for the first time in centuries, felt the very faint edge of something that was not quite certainty. He set it aside. He had time. He was always the one with time. But the feeling had happened. He noted it with the precision of a man who noted everything. And found he did not entirely know what to do with it. Chapter 7, Blood, Stone, and Starlight. Vladimir came on a night with no moon. Not by accident. Nothing Vladimir did was by accident. The moonless sky was a choice, old vampire preference for the deepest dark, the kind of darkness that pressed against the castle walls and erased the mountain outlines and made the world feel like it ended at the edge of the torchlight. He came with 4 people, which was a statement in itself. Not an army. Not a delegation. 4, the number that said I am not afraid of your numbers, I simply brought what I needed. Naruto knew he was coming 3 hours before he arrived. The low-frequency awareness had been building since midnight, not the specific spike of immediate threat but the slow escalating pressure of something large moving through the night toward him, the way you felt a storm coming before any of the usual signs were visible. He'd been awake since it started. He sat on the edge of his bed with his elbows on his knees and felt it grow and thought about patience, Vladimir's centuries of it, the long game, the careful building of a situation designed to arrive exactly like this, on a moonless night with 4 people and 1,000 years of certainty behind him. He got dressed. He went and woke Mavis first. She opened her door already alert, which meant she'd felt something too, which told him her sensitivity was stronger than he'd realized. She looked at his face and said, "How long?" 3 hours, he said. Maybe less. I'll get Frank and Wayne. Get them but keep it quiet, he said. I don't want the whole hotel mobilized. Small and smart beats large and panicked. She was already moving down the corridor. He watched her go, decisive, no wasted motion, and then went to find Dracula. Dracula was not asleep. He was in his office, which Naruto had come to understand was where Dracula went when something was coming, not to hide, but to think, to be in the room with his books and his fire and the photograph of his son and do the long interior work of being ready. He looked up when Naruto opened the door and the expression on his face said he already knew. He's moving, Dracula said. Yes. Naruto came in and stood at the desk. He'll come to the front gates. He won't sneak, not this time. He's past the reconnaissance phase. He paused. He's coming to talk. He's coming to take, Dracula said flatly. He thinks they're the same thing, Naruto said. That's his problem. He looked at his father. Let him come to the gates. Don't go out to meet him, make him come in, on our ground, in our space. Everything that happens inside this castle happens on our terms. Dracula looked at him steadily. You have been planning this. Since the letter, Naruto said. Something moved in Dracula's face, not surprise, past surprise at this point, but the compound expression he had when his son confirmed something he'd suspected, and the confirmation was larger than the suspicion. What do you need from me? Be yourself, Naruto said. Don't manage him. Don't be diplomatic. Be the man who built this hotel because he loved people and wanted them to have somewhere safe. Be that completely. He held his father's gaze. Vladimir has spent 1,000 years arguing with a version of you that he constructed. Show him the real one. Dracula was quiet for a moment. And you? I'll be right there, Naruto said. They came at the 3rd hour, as Naruto had calculated. The gates groaned when they opened, that theatrical, carefully maintained groan, and Vladimir walked through them into the torchlit courtyard with the ease of someone entering a place they had been before, which he had. He had stood in this courtyard centuries before it was a hotel, when it was something older and less gentle. He had stood here and argued with his brother and left and not come back until now. He was tall. That was the first thing, taller than Dracula, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of physical presence that seemed to displace air around it. Dark hair going silver at the temples, worn long, the aristocratic styling of another century that he wore without self-consciousness because it was genuinely his. His face was the family face. Naruto recognized it from the mirror and from Dracula and from somewhere deeper than either, the cellular recognition of blood knowing blood, but with a different quality to it. Dracula's face was capable of grief, capable of love, the high cheekbones and the sharp features worn soft by centuries of caring about things. Vladimir's face had the same architecture with the softness removed, the same structure resolved into something that was purely precise. His eyes were red, darker than Dracula's, almost black red, the color of old coals. He had 4 people behind him. 3 Naruto didn't know. The 4th was Count Aldrich, which was confirmation of what Naruto had suspected and not satisfaction to have confirmed. Vladimir scanned the courtyard. Dracula standing at the hotel entrance, composed and present. Frank and Wayne at the courtyard's flanks, Wayne with all 9 cubs mysteriously absent, which meant Wanda had them somewhere safe, which meant Wayne was free to be entirely what he was tonight. Frank was enormous and still in a way that Frank was rarely still, the particular stillness of a being who understood that his size was information and was choosing to let it speak. And Naruto. Standing between Dracula and the gates. Not beside Dracula, between Dracula and Vladimir, the ground between them. Hands in his pockets, standing in the torchlight with the medallion visible at his throat on its cord, his eyes doing the luminescent thing at the steady resting temperature level, just enough to be visible. Looking at Vladimir with the same expression he brought to everything, level, direct, unafraid. Vladimir looked at him for a long time. So, he said. His voice was extraordinary, deep and controlled, the product of 1,000 years of choosing every word with the care of someone who understood that words were the primary weapon and kept his sharpest. Here you are. Here I am, Naruto said. Vladimir walked forward slowly. His people stayed at the gate. He walked until he was 10 feet from Naruto and stopped, and looked at him with the coal-red eyes moving over him the way a very intelligent person read a text, looking for the argument, the structure, the places where the logic held and the places where it didn't. You look like her, Vladimir said. Not to Dracula. To Naruto. I know, Naruto said. Your mother was an interesting woman. He said it with genuine respect, which was more unsettling than contempt would have been. She found this place by accident and stayed by choice and never seemed to question whether she should. I always found that, he tilted his head. Admirable, in its way. And also illustrative. Illustrative of what? Naruto asked. Of the way humans love things that will outlast them, Vladimir said, with the smooth ease of a man taking a conversational path he had walked many times. They attach to what is permanent because they are not. It is not love so much as borrowed duration. He looked at Naruto. You are neither fully one thing nor the other. That is a considerable burden. It hasn't felt like a burden, Naruto said. Not yet, Vladimir said pleasantly. Not ever, Naruto said, and said it with the same flat certainty with which he said everything, and Vladimir noted it. Naruto could see him note it, the precise analytical mind filing the data point. Dracula came forward to stand beside Naruto, which was not the plan but which Naruto had known was going to happen because his father was not built for standing behind other people when his family was in front of them. He came forward and stood beside Naruto, and the two brothers faced each other across the torchlit courtyard for the first time in decades. Vladimir, Dracula said. Vladislaus. The older name. The original. Vladimir using it deliberately, placing them in a time before everything else, the long intimate cruelty of someone who knew exactly which door to put their key in. Not tonight, Dracula said, and his voice was rough and present and completely without the diplomatic management he typically brought to difficult situations, exactly as Naruto had asked. I am not that name to you anymore and you know it. You gave up the right to it when you had my son taken. Something moved in Vladimir's face. Fast. Gone. A necessary action, he said, and the smoothness was back but it had cost him half a second to retrieve it. Necessary for what? Naruto asked. Vladimir turned the coal-red eyes to him. For the future I was trying to protect. A future where our kind, I know the argument, Naruto said. I've heard it through your operatives and in your letter and in what you said to my father in the valley. I understand it. He paused. I'm not going to tell you it's stupid. It's not stupid. It's wrong, but it's not stupid. Vladimir blinked. Once. The specific blink of a man who had walked into a conversation he had scripted in advance and found that the other party had a different script. Wrong how, he said. Not defensively. Genuinely asking, which was the most dangerous sign, the intelligent antagonist who was actually listening. You built your whole case on the premise that coexistence is impossible, Naruto said, and took a step forward, not aggressive, just closing distance, refusing to let the 10 feet become a safe management zone. That monsters who lower their defenses will be destroyed. That the hotel is a beautiful lie. He paused. But the hotel has been running for decades and the people here are alive and whole and genuinely free. That's not a lie. You can disagree with the approach, but the evidence exists. You're choosing not to read it. One hotel, Vladimir said. One protected corner. The rest of the world is complicated, Naruto said. That's different from irredeemable. He was 8 feet from Vladimir now. You've been watching this place for decades. You've seen it work. And you keep calling it a lie because if it's working, your whole argument collapses. He held Vladimir's gaze steadily. That's not philosophy. That's protecting an idea because you've been the idea for so long you don't know who you'd be without it. The courtyard was very still. Frank and Wayne had gone completely motionless. Behind Vladimir, his 4 people were exchanging looks that they weren't entirely containing. Vladimir looked at Naruto for a long moment with the coal-red eyes doing deep, fast work. You are 16 years old, he said. Yeah, Naruto said. And you believe you understand a conflict that has been developing for centuries. I understand what I see, Naruto said. And what I see is a very smart person who has been right about a lot of things for a very long time, and those two facts, being smart and being right frequently, have made it almost impossible for you to consider that you might be wrong about this specific thing. He paused. Being right all the time is the worst thing that can happen to someone's thinking. Vladimir was quiet. The coal-red eyes hadn't moved from Naruto's face. Come inside, Naruto said. Come in and sit down and look at this place, actually look at it, not as evidence for your argument, but as what it is. If you can do that and still believe it's a lie, I'll listen to everything you have to say. He held out his hand. Not offering submission. Offering a door. I'm not afraid of your argument. I'm not afraid of you. Come inside. Vladimir looked at the extended hand. At the luminescent eyes behind it. At the 16-year-old who had walked out of a human village 3 weeks ago and was standing in the courtyard of his ancestral home offering him a door with the complete unself-conscious confidence of someone who had decided this was their ground and meant it to the bone. He looked at his brother. Dracula said nothing. He was watching Vladimir with the rough, present, unmanaged expression that Naruto had asked for, the face of the man who built the hotel, who loved people and wanted them safe, who had named a grave with a question mark because he refused to let go. Vladimir looked back at Naruto's extended hand. No, he said. And then everything happened at once. The signal was subtle, a shift of Vladimir's weight, barely perceptible, that Naruto's blood red before his eyes did. He was already moving when Vladimir's 3 unnamed people came off the gate at speed, and Aldrich moved from the flank with the crystalline structure from Monster Fest, or a second one, a twin, raised and active. Naruto went for Aldrich first, because the device was the priority and because his legs made the decision before his mind had finished the sentence. He covered the ground in the way that had stopped surprising the hotel's inner circle but hadn't stopped being what it was, the real speed, not the pulled-back training version, the full extension of it, and hit Aldrich's arm with a precision that sent the crystalline device into the air without hitting Aldrich anywhere that would cause permanent damage. He caught the device with his other hand, squeezed, and the second one became fragments the same as the first. Behind him, Frank came off the wall. Frank at full extension was something Naruto had practiced against and trained with and still found extraordinary, 8 feet of assembled creature moving with a speed that his size had no right to allow, the particular power of something that had been built to withstand damage and had learned, over decades, to do more than just withstand. He took 2 of Vladimir's 3 unnamed people simultaneously, and they were ancient vampires and they were fast and none of that helped them because Frank was Frank and Frank was also, tonight, furious in the quiet way that was always worse than the loud way. Wayne was a blur of gray on the left flank, moving with the grace that wolves had when they stopped being polite about it, and the third unnamed person found out what it meant to underestimate a werewolf who had been running with Dracula for 40 years. That left Vladimir. Who had not moved. Who stood in the center of the courtyard and watched everything happen around him with the coal-red eyes doing the rapid analytical work and the face of someone reaching a conclusion they hadn't expected to reach. Naruto turned from the shattered device and looked at him. Breathing normally, crystal fragments in his open hand, the medallion warm at his throat. He met Vladimir's gaze across the courtyard. You don't actually want to fight me, Naruto said. No, Vladimir said. I don't. And the honesty of it, the complete absence of pretense in it, was more significant than anything else he'd said or done tonight. I wanted to measure you. You've measured me, Naruto said. What did you find? Vladimir looked at him for a long moment. More than I expected, he said. Considerably more. He paused. The disorientation field at the festival. My man said you walked through it. Yes. The activation speed. The strength. He was not reading these as threats. He was reading them as data, with the strange detached admiration of someone who genuinely valued excellence regardless of its political inconvenience. And the way you think. He tilted his head. You were right, earlier. About what being right all the time does to a person's thinking. A slight pause. It was an irritating observation. I know, Naruto said. I am not conceding anything, Vladimir said, clearly. I still believe, I know what you believe, Naruto said. And I know you believe it genuinely. That's why this isn't over. He took a step toward him. But you came here to take me or convert me, and you found out tonight that neither of those things is happening. Not because I'm stronger than you expected, though I am. Because I'm not confused. He held Vladimir's gaze. You can't convert someone who knows who they are. Vladimir looked at him with the coal-red eyes for a long silent moment. Then he looked at Dracula. Then back at Naruto. You are your mother's child, he said, and said it with something that was not affection but was in the same territory, the respect of an intelligence for something it found genuinely impressive. Yeah, Naruto said. And his. He tilted his head toward Dracula. Both of those things. Mavis came through the hotel's main doors at that moment, which was not the plan. The plan had been for her to stay inside with a clear view from the upper balcony where she could respond to anything that made it inside the hotel. She came through the doors and down the front steps with the focused clean energy she'd had since the training room, and she looked at the courtyard, Frank and Wayne managing the situation on the flanks, Aldrich on the ground, Naruto and Vladimir in the center, and she came and stood beside Naruto. Not behind him. Beside him. Vladimir looked at her with an expression that shifted briefly into something that was almost, not warmth, something else, the recognition of a lineage, the specific attention of someone who cared about bloodlines, looking at the clearest expression of one. Mavis Dracula, he said. Vladimir, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. I grew up hearing your name like it was a cautionary tale. You're less terrifying in person. Something happened in Vladimir's face that might have been, in a different life, amusement. And you are exactly your father, he said, which was the most human thing he'd said all night. I'll take that, she said. Vladimir looked at the two of them standing together, the lost son who had come home with his mother's eyes and his father's name and something else entirely that belonged to neither of them, and the daughter who had spent 16 years inside these walls and had chosen, every time she was tested, to be larger than the walls, and the coal-red eyes did something that took a full second to contain. He looked at Dracula. You have built something here, he said quietly. I have been calling it a beautiful lie for a very long time. A pause. It is possible I have been incorrect in the assessment. He said it like it cost him something, which it did, every word, every syllable, the price of 1,000 years of certainty loosening a single thread. Come inside, Naruto said again. The same offer. The same door. Vladimir looked at him. You would invite me in. After tonight. Tonight wasn't a battle, Naruto said. It was a conversation. He held the coal-red gaze. We're not done talking. They sat in the hotel's large meeting room, not the office, not a private space, the room that was built for groups, for deliberation, for the kind of conversation that needed witnesses. Vladimir at one end of the long table. Dracula at the other. Naruto beside Dracula. Mavis beside Naruto. Frank and Wayne at the room's corners, Wayne with his arms crossed and Frank doing the contained emotion thing with remarkable discipline. Aldrich was in a guest room under what Wayne referred to diplomatically as observation. The three unnamed operatives were with him. Vladimir looked around the table. This is not the conversation I planned, he said. I know, Naruto said. That's the point. And then they talked. Not in the way that Vladimir had talked to Dracula in the valley, the careful framing, the ideological argument, the manipulation dressed as philosophy. They talked the way real conversations worked, which was messy and interrupted and doubled back on itself and went places nobody had anticipated. Vladimir laid out his case without the political dressing, the genuine version, what he'd seen, what he believed, the specific losses and specific events that had built his worldview over centuries. Naruto listened to all of it. He asked questions, real ones, the ones that went a level below the surface argument. Mavis asked questions that came from a completely different angle, the lived experience of someone who had actually existed inside the thing Vladimir was theorizing about, who could say here is what it feels like from inside your beautiful lie, and say it with specificity and force. Dracula spoke less than any of them, but when he spoke it was with the rough, unmanaged honesty that Naruto had asked for, and it was devastatingly effective because it was real, and Vladimir had been constructing a managed version of his brother for a very long time and kept colliding with the real one. At one point, somewhere past 2 in the morning, Vladimir said something that Naruto had been waiting for since the courtyard, the thing underneath the ideology, the event that had calcified everything else around it, the original wound. He said it about a monster he had loved who had been killed by a human, centuries ago, before the hotel existed, before any of this. He said it once, plainly, and then moved quickly back to the argument as if he hadn't said it. Naruto let him move quickly back to the argument. But later, when the immediate thread had exhausted itself, he came back to it. "The monster you lost," he said. That was the beginning. Vladimir was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "And you decided the lesson was that humans could never be trusted." "The evidence supported, the evidence of one event," Naruto said. "And then you spent centuries looking for confirming evidence and finding it, because if you look for something long enough the world will show it to you." He paused. "But grief isn't a theory. You don't get to make a philosophy out of it and call it clear thinking." Vladimir looked at him. "You're allowed to have been devastated by it," Naruto said, and his voice was quieter now, without the argument register, in a register that was simply present and direct. "That's real. That happened. But it didn't prove what you decided it proved." The room was very still. Vladimir's coal-red eyes were on Naruto, and for the first time tonight, for possibly the first time in a very long time, they were not doing the rapid analytical work. They were just looking. The face of a man who has been the idea for so long that someone cracking the idea open to find the person underneath it is genuinely, completely surprising. "You are," he said, slowly, "a very unusual person." "So I've been told," Naruto said. "I am not," Vladimir stopped. "Reorganized. I am not changing my mind tonight. I want that to be clear. What I believe is not dismantled by one conversation." "I know," Naruto said. "I'm not asking for tonight. I'm asking for the door to stay open." Vladimir looked at him. "At Mavis. At Dracula. At the room around him, the hotel breathing through its stone walls, the life of the place moving through the night outside in muffled sounds of existing. The door," he said carefully, "will stay open." It was not an agreement. It was not a conversion. It was a thread, a single thread, in the argument that had previously been without them. Naruto knew what it was and what it wasn't and found it sufficient for tonight. "Good," he said. Vladimir left before dawn. He left with his people, Aldrich included, though Aldrich left with the specific quality of a man whose calculation about which side had the better odds had been significantly revised, and he left without the crystalline fragments or the ideology as weapon framing he'd arrived with. He left with a conversation he hadn't expected and a door he hadn't meant to leave open and a boy's face in his memory that carried his brother's wife's eyes and something else, something that was neither of them, just itself, impossible and settled and entirely unapologetic about being exactly what it was. He went into the moonless dark and the castle closed its gates behind him. Naruto stood in the courtyard until the sound of them disappeared completely. Then he stood there a little longer, the medallion warm against his chest, the cold air moving, the torches guttering low as the night got thin toward morning. Mavis came and stood beside him. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," he said. "But it's different now." "Is different enough?" He thought about Vladimir's coal-red eyes doing the work of reconsidering for the first time in centuries. The thread. The door. "For tonight," he said. "Yeah." She was quiet. "Then, you were extraordinary out there." "So were you," he said, and meant it completely. She'd come through those doors and stood beside him and held the coal-red gaze without flinching, and she'd asked questions in that room that came from a place of genuine understanding, and she'd been, in every moment, entirely herself. "I just stood next to you," she said. "That's not what you did and you know it," he said, and looked at her, and she looked at him, and the courtyard was quiet around them and the last torchlight was low and amber. She was close again. Not again, always. She was always close now. The proximity had become the resting state, and neither of them had named it, but both of them knew exactly what it was and had known for some time and had been waiting, separately, for the right moment. He'd told her that the right time didn't come with clean conditions. He'd been right about that. He turned toward her and she turned toward him, and the hotel breathed around them, and he put his hand against her face the way he had on the roof, warm palm, the blood temperature warmth of his nature running through it, and this time she didn't lean into it slightly. She leaned into it completely. "Naruto," she said, very quietly. "I know," he said. And kissed her, in the dying torchlight in the courtyard of the castle that was his home, and she kissed him back with the same quality she brought to everything that mattered, completely, without management, all the way through. The medallion was warm between them. Above, in the office window, Dracula stood with his coffee and looked down at the courtyard and then immediately looked away because some things a father did not need to observe directly, and instead looked at the photograph on his desk, the baby with the dark hair and the blue eyes, and said something in Romanian that had no direct translation but meant roughly, "Look what happened, look what we made, look." The mountains were dark around the castle and the dawn was somewhere close but not here yet, and the hotel's torches burned low and amber, and Mavis Dracula had her hands in the front of Naruto's jacket and was not looking at anything else in the world. She never would, after this. Chapter 8. Home is not a quiet thing. The morning after Vladimir left, Naruto slept until noon for the first time in his life. He didn't plan it. He went to bed when the dawn was coming up pale over the eastern mountains, still carrying the warmth of the courtyard and the medallion and Mavis's hands in his jacket, and he lay down with the intention of being up in a few hours, and his body made a different decision entirely. The accumulated weight of 3 weeks, the travel, the revelations, the training, the festival, the valley meeting, Vladimir's arrival, found him all at once the way exhaustion found you when the adrenaline finally had somewhere to go, and he went down into the deepest sleep he'd had since the alley in Konoha. He woke to Mavis sitting on the stone windowsill of his room reading a book, one leg pulled up and the other hanging down, fully composed, like she'd been there for a while and had made herself comfortable. He looked at her. She looked at him over the top of the book. "You slept," she said. "Yeah." He sat up. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle that put the sun well past its peak. The light sensitivity was there but manageable. Morning sun was the hard part, afternoon was just warm. "How long have you been there?" "About an hour," she said, with the perfect casual tone of someone who had absolutely been there longer than an hour. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the clear direct gaze that had stopped being careful about itself somewhere around the courtyard the night before, the look that was all the way there now, not managing its distance. He thought about the courtyard and the low torchlight and the medallion warm between them, and she was clearly thinking about it too, the slight color in her pale cheeks confirming it. "Are you going to keep sitting on my windowsill," he said, "or are we going to go eat something?" She closed the book. "Both," she said. "Separately. Eat first." He laughed, which was the big genuine unself-conscious version, and it filled the room the way it always filled rooms, too large for the space, completely unashamed about it, and she watched it happen with the expression she'd had in the corridor on the second floor when she'd almost fallen, the warm helpless look that she'd stopped trying to put away. They went downstairs. The kitchen at noon was Frank's domain, and Frank at noon after a significant night was something specific and wonderful. He had the apron on and 3 things going simultaneously and a look of concentrated benevolence on his enormous face that suggested he had processed everything that had happened in the last 12 hours and arrived at a state of profound emotional satisfaction that he was now expressing through cooking. He looked up when Naruto and Mavis came in together, noted the together quality of it with a precision that belied his gentle expression, and immediately put more food on. "Sit," he said. They sat. Wayne was already at the table with a cup of something, looking like a man who had been awake for 36 hours and was running on pack animal solidarity and whatever was in the cup. He looked at them, looked at the together quality Frank had already clocked, and said nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. "Is everyone okay?" Naruto asked. "Everyone is excellent," Frank said, with emphasis. The three operatives left with Vladimir. Aldrich left separately. He tried to make a dignified exit and mostly managed it. He set a plate down in front of Naruto. "Drac is in his office. He's been up there since dawn." "Doing what?" "I think he's writing something," Wayne said, around his cup. "Letters, maybe. He gets like that after big nights. He has to process through the hands." He squinted. "Old vampire thing." Naruto ate, and while he ate he let himself actually feel the morning, the kitchen warmth, Frank's cooking, Wayne's comfortable exhausted presence, the hotel sounds coming through the walls and floors. He had been here less than a month and he knew those sounds the way you knew the sounds of a place you'd lived in for years. The specific creak of the third step on the east staircase. The way the upper corridor's drafts moved at different times of day. The sound Frank's footsteps made on the kitchen stone compared to the soft near silence of Mavis's. Home was a sound, he thought. Before it was anything else, it was the specific acoustic signature of a space that knew you were there. Mavis was watching him think, which she'd gotten good at, distinguishing the active thinking from the passive, knowing when to interrupt and when to let it run. She let it run. When he came back she was eating her own food with the patient ease of someone who had gotten comfortable with his silences, which was new enough that he noticed it and felt something warm move through him at the noticing. "I want to go back to the valley," he said. Both Wayne and Frank looked up. "Not to find Vladimir," he said. "Just to see it. The place where Dracula met him." He paused. "There's history in that ground. I want to know it." "That's very," Frank started, and then stopped and just nodded, because what he'd been about to say was very Drac and he wasn't sure it was his to say. Naruto looked at him. "Say it." Frank met his eyes. "That's very much something your father would do," he said. "He knows every inch of the mountains around this place. He walks them when he needs to think." A pause. "He started doing it after Martha died and he never stopped." Naruto sat with that. "Then, come up with me to his office when you're done." "Yeah," Frank said simply. Dracula was indeed writing when they arrived, letters. Wayne had been right, 3 of them in various states of completion spread across the desk with the specific organized chaos of a man who had been working through something. He looked up when Naruto and Frank came in and his expression did the compound thing before settling into something that was simply present. "How are you?" Naruto said, and made it a genuine question rather than a greeting. Dracula looked at him. "Better than I expected to be," he said honestly. "The conversation with Vladimir," he paused. "I have been having versions of that conversation in my head for decades. Having the real one is," he searched for the word. "Strange. Like a fever breaking." "The thread," Naruto said. "Yes." Dracula leaned back. "He will not change overnight. He may not change at all. But there is something different in it now and I believe, I genuinely believe, that he will not move against the hotel again in the near term." A pause. "He needs to think. Vladimir thinking is the closest he comes to being safe." "And Aldrich?" "Aldrich is a man who made a calculation that didn't hold," Dracula said, with the cool precision of someone who had managed politics for centuries. "He will recalibrate. He is too self-interested to hold a losing position indefinitely." He looked at his son. "You handled him at the festival dinner with more effectiveness than I could have. He was never afraid of me, I am too familiar. You are new data." Frank made a sound. "Frank," Dracula said. "I didn't say anything," Frank said. Dracula looked at him. Frank looked at the ceiling. It was the most normal interaction Naruto had witnessed between them, the easy affectionate irritation of decades, and something about seeing it, the lived-in quality of his father's friendships, the particular texture of love that came from choosing people again and again over a very long time, felt important in a way he was still learning to articulate. "I want to go to the valley," Naruto said. "Tonight. Before the light." Dracula looked at him. "Why?" "Because it's part of this place," Naruto said. "And I want to know the place." Something moved in Dracula's face. He looked at Frank. Frank appeared to be studying the bookshelf with great interest. Dracula looked back at his son. "I will take you," he said. "I know," Naruto said. They left 2 hours before sunset, just the two of them, which was not the plan. Frank and Wayne had both angled for inclusion with transparent subtlety and been declined without discussion. The mountain path down from the castle was narrow and old, cut into the rock by feet that had been walking it for centuries, and Dracula knew every stone of it in the way that Mavis knew every stone of the castle interior, completely, without needing to look. Naruto walked beside him where the path was wide enough and behind him where it wasn't, and they went down through the cloud layer into the cleaner air below, the castle disappearing above them into the gray-white, and the mountains opened up in every direction with the particular vast uncaring beauty of very old things. Dracula talked. Not about Vladimir, not directly. About the mountains. About the castle's history, the full version, not the edited for guests version but the real one, with all the losses and all the changes and all the things the stone had been before it was a hotel. He talked about Martha the way he rarely talked about her, in the specific detail of everyday things, the way she had walked down this exact path, the particular way she had laughed, the argument they'd had once about the design of the third-floor balcony that she had won comprehensively and been right about. Naruto listened and stored it, the way he stored everything important, completely, with full attention, nothing sliding past. At some point, somewhere on the lower path where the trees began and the mountain leveled briefly, Dracula stopped and looked out at the range spread before them, the peaks going amber in the late sun, and said, without preamble, "I missed the first 16 years of your life." "Yes," Naruto said. "I cannot get them back." "No. I am aware that saying I am sorry is," Dracula stopped. "It is not equal to the thing. It does not match the scale of it." Naruto looked at him. He stood on the mountain path in the afternoon light with his father beside him and thought about everything the apology was trying to reach, the stolen years, the village, the old man in the alley, the name on a question-mark grave, and felt all of it, the full weight of it, without letting it flatten him. "You didn't take me," he said. "You lost me. Those are different things." "I should have looked, you were told I was dead," Naruto said, with a firmness that was not cruelty but was not gentleness either, the firmness of someone who needed this point to land cleanly. "You mourned. That was the right response to being told your child was dead." He held his father's gaze. "You can't fight information you don't have." Dracula was quiet. "I had a good life," Naruto said. "I want you to hear that as the true thing it is, not as something I'm saying to make you feel better." He paused. "The people who raised me, they weren't family, not in the blood sense, but they were good to me. I ate. I slept. I learned to fight, which turns out to be useful. I learned who I was independent of what I was, which is also useful." He looked out at the mountains. "I came here already formed. Already knowing how to be myself." He let a beat pass. "That's something I got from those 16 years. I don't know who I'd be if I'd grown up in the castle, but I know who I am now. I think that's worth something." Dracula was looking at him with the expression that had no clean name, too large, too compound, the 16 years of grief and guilt meeting the present tense reality of who his son had turned out to be and finding that the reality was something he could not have designed or hoped for or controlled. Just what happened when someone grew up free to be themselves. "I think it is worth a great deal," Dracula said quietly. They stood together on the mountain path as the sun finished going down, and the sky went through its colors above the peaks, and neither of them needed to say anything else, which was its own kind of arrival. They found the valley as the last light was leaving it, a wide bowl in the mountain, a ring of old stones at its center, ash from the fire still there in the ring. Naruto stood at the edge of the valley and looked at the fire ring and felt the medallion against his chest and thought about Vladimir sitting across from his father over those coals and trying to use the truth as a weapon. He crouched down and put his hand on the cold ash. He stood back up and looked at the mountains. "We're going to have to deal with him eventually," he said. "Not fight. Deal with." "Actually. I know," Dracula said. "The thread might be enough for now. It won't be enough forever." He looked at his father. "I want to talk to him again. On my own, when the time is right." Dracula's instinct was visible in his face, the protective response, immediate and old. He looked at his son and the response ran into the reality of what he'd seen in the last 3 weeks and the reality won. "When you decide the time is right," he said, which was not easy for him and was the right thing. "Yeah," Naruto said. "When I decide." They walked back up in the dark, and Naruto's eyes handled it without effort, the night vision that was just his resting state now, and he led the way up the narrow path without needing to think about it, and Dracula followed his son up the mountain toward the castle in the dark and found that following felt entirely different from what he'd expected. It felt like trust. The week that followed was the quietest the hotel had been since Naruto arrived, and the quality of the quiet was different from the taut-bow tension of before. This was the genuine article, the deep exhale of a place that had been through something and had come out the other side with its foundations intact. Guests came and went in the normal rhythms. Frank cooked. Wayne's cubs destroyed things and were retrieved. Murray told a prophecy from start to finish without interruption for the first time in recorded history because Wayne was too tired to stop him, and it turned out to be quite good. Naruto trained every night with Dracula. The abilities kept developing, not in the explosive uncontrolled way of the early weeks, but in the steady accumulative way of practice, each session adding precision to what was already there, deepening the control, making the power something that was fully his and not just happening to him. The wall in the training room still had the hole from the first week. Dracula had left it unrepaired. Neither of them had discussed why. The mist form came on the 5th night after Vladimir's departure, which surprised both of them by its timing. They were in the middle of a speed drill when something happened in Naruto's body that felt like a decision made without him, and for 3 seconds he was not entirely solid, not fog exactly but the state between states, present and absent simultaneously. And then he came back to himself standing in the same spot he'd been in and both of them looked at each other. "That's new," Naruto said. "That should not have come yet," Dracula said, with the expression he'd had at the hole in the wall. "Your activation continues to exceed the expected timeline. Is that a problem?" "It is extraordinary," Dracula said, which was not an answer and was a more interesting thing than an answer. The bat form came 2 nights after that. Also unplanned. Also slightly ahead of schedule. The shift was clean and complete, and Naruto spent 20 minutes flying in the training room ceiling's height while Dracula stood below and tracked him with the expression of a man who was continuously discovering that the measurements he'd been using were too small. When Naruto landed and shifted back, Dracula said nothing for a moment. "What?" Naruto said. "Your form," Dracula said. "In the shift." He paused. "The markings." Naruto blinked. "What markings?" Dracula crossed to the wall mirror, there was one in the training room for form checking, and gestured at it. Naruto looked at his reflection. In the torchlight the whisker marks on his face were visible as always, the 6 familiar lines. But something new, when he held the edge of the shift, not fully transformed but in the threshold between, a faint luminescent pattern appeared along his cheekbones, following the whisker marks outward, something that looked older than his bat form and older than vampire biology, something that seemed to come from a different layer of what he was entirely. He looked at it for a moment. "Huh," he said. "I have never seen that in any activation," Dracula said, carefully. "In anyone. The human half?" Naruto asked. "I don't know," Dracula said honestly. "I don't have a framework for it." He paused. I'm not sure anyone does. Naruto looked at the marks in the mirror. They faded as he stepped back from the threshold state, going quiet, back to the familiar whisker lines. He touched them with 2 fingers. They've always been there, he said. Yes, Dracula said. And they mean something. I just don't know yet what. We'll find out, Naruto said, and turned from the mirror, and the certainty in those 3 words was so complete and so habitual that Dracula found himself believing it the way you believed gravity, not because you'd verified it but because it was simply the operating condition of the world. On the 9th day after Vladimir's departure, Mavis took Naruto off the mountain. She didn't tell Dracula first, which was its own kind of statement, and Dracula found out when they were already gone and stood in the courtyard with the note she'd left and looked at it for a long moment and then went back inside, which was his own kind of statement. They went down the mountain on foot in the early morning, the manageable light, Naruto with his collar up and his hands in his pockets and the particular physical ease of someone who had learned to navigate his own sensitivity without drama. Mavis walked beside him and pointed things out, the villages in the valley, the road that wound east toward the larger towns, the forest that she could see from the observatory roof on clear nights and had been looking at her whole life. She was looking at it from inside now. He watched her face as they came down through the cloud layer and the valley opened up before them, and the thing he saw there was so real and unguarded that he looked away quickly to give it privacy, the expression of someone seeing from the outside something they had only ever seen from the inside, the world reconfiguring itself around a new position, the particular stunned quality of expanded space. They walked for 2 hours in the valley, through a small market town where nobody knew who they were, just 2 young people, which was the most ordinary and extraordinary thing, and Mavis looked at everything with the open attention of someone who had saved their looking up for a long time and now had somewhere to put it. She bought something at a market stall, a small glass object, nothing expensive, just a thing that caught the light well. She turned it in her hands and looked at it and then at Naruto. "This is the first thing I've bought," she said. "Ever. With my own money. From somewhere that wasn't the hotel." He looked at the glass thing in her hands. "How does it feel?" "Enormous," she said, which was the most honest thing. They both started laughing at the same time, not at her, at the enormousness, the specific comedy and beauty of how large the small things could be when you'd been kept from them. They sat at a table outside a cafe and drank coffee that was nowhere near as good as Frank's but tasted better than Frank's in the specific way that things tasted better when they were chosen freely and drunk in a new place, and Mavis kept looking at everything, the street, the people, the ordinary movement of a town going about its ordinary business, with an expression that was drinking it in through every available surface. "We can do this more," he said. She looked at him. Your dad left you a note saying he found out and didn't come after you," Naruto said. He had checked his pocket before they left. The communication between Mavis and Dracula that functioned over distance, the vampire sense that worked like a low-frequency signal, had been quiet and deliberate all morning. Dracula knew. Dracula had chosen to know and not intervene. "That's him telling you something." She was quiet for a moment. "He's trying," she said softly. "He is," Naruto agreed. "Give him the room to keep trying." She looked at her coffee. Then out at the street. Then at him. "You always do that," she said. "What?" "Hold space for everyone at the same time," she said. "Vladimir's grief. Dracula's guilt. My restlessness. You just," she tilted her head. "You hold the whole thing without squeezing any of it." He thought about it. "Everyone's got a real thing underneath their complicated thing," he said. "The complicated thing is usually just the real thing that didn't get handled right." He shrugged. "I'm interested in the real thing." She was looking at him with the full look again, the all-the-way there version that she'd stopped managing. "What's your real thing?" she asked. "Underneath the complicated thing." He held her gaze. "I want to belong somewhere," he said, plainly. "I always did. I had the village but I was never entirely of it. I was always slightly outside." He paused. I came here and for the first time in my life I'm not outside. I'm inside. He held her gaze. You're part of why. The table between them. The coffee. The ordinary street. She looked at him with the small not-planned smile that had been happening since the first night, but it was a different quality of it now, not surprised by itself, not trying to shut itself down. Just there, easy and real. You're part of why I want to stay outside, she said, and tilted her head at the street, at the valley, the world, the enormous outside of things. And also inside. She paused. That's the first time those two things have felt like they could both be true. He nodded. He understood it exactly. We'll do both, he said. She reached across the table and turned her hand palm up, and he put his hand in hers, warm against her cool, the blood temperature contrast that had been there since the beginning, storm and midnight, two specific kinds of night. They sat in the cafe in the valley in the ordinary morning light and held hands across a small table and were, for a while, just two people in a town, which was the most specific and ordinary miracle available. When they came back up the mountain in the afternoon, Dracula was in the courtyard. Not positioned dramatically, not waiting, not performing a greeting. He was doing something practical, examining a section of the gate hinge that had been developing a genuine rather than theatrical groan, crouched down with a tool in his hand. He heard them come through the gates and stood and looked at his daughter, and Mavis looked at him, and there was a long moment that had 16 years of complicated love in it and no clean resolution to any of it, just the two of them standing in the courtyard with the full weight of what was true between them. Mavis crossed the courtyard and hugged him. Not carefully. Not the polished affection of long habit. She hugged him the way you hugged someone when you had decided to stop being careful about loving them, all the way, and Dracula, who was 1,000 years old and had stood against forces that had shaken the monster world and had never once in public shown anything that wasn't contained and controlled, put his arms around his daughter and held on. Naruto watched from the gate and felt the medallion against his chest and looked at the mountains and gave them their moment. After a while Dracula looked up and met Naruto's eyes over Mavis's shoulder and said nothing, which said everything. Naruto came across the courtyard and clapped his father on the shoulder once, solid and brief, the way you touched someone when words were too small for the thing, and Dracula's hand came up and gripped his arm for a moment before releasing. Frank was watching from the hotel entrance with both hands pressed to his face and tears running freely down his enormous cheeks. Frank, Wayne said, beside him. I told you I wasn't going to say anything, Frank said, voice completely wrecked. I'm not saying anything. You're crying again. I'm allowed to cry, Frank said, with tremendous dignity. Murray appeared at Wayne's other side and said, in the sand-on-stone voice, the stars said this too. All of it. I said it at the beginning, nobody listened, Murray, Wayne said. I'm just noting, we know, Wayne said. You were right. Write it down, we'll acknowledge it at dinner. Murray straightened with satisfaction. Thank you, he said. Griffin's floating glasses appeared in the doorway above their heads. I also want it acknowledged that I was the first one to notice something was different about him. At breakfast. Day 1. I said huh. You said huh, Wayne confirmed. That was the acknowledgement, Griffin said. I want it on record. Naruto heard all of it from the courtyard and turned to look at the hotel entrance, Frank weeping with dignity, Wayne managing everything, Murray vindicated, Griffin's floating glasses demanding recognition, and laughed. The big room-filling version. The one that didn't ask permission. Mavis heard it and felt it in her chest and looked at him over her father's shoulder, and the full look was there, easy and permanent. That evening the hotel's inner circle gathered in the kitchen, which was where they always gathered when it was real, not the formal spaces, not the meeting rooms, but the kitchen, Frank's domain, warm and close and smelling of everything good. Wanda with the cubs finally allowed back in and orbiting everyone's feet. Frank cooking with the absorbed joy of a man for whom feeding people was love in its most direct expression. Wayne and Griffin arguing about something with the comfortable rhythm of a long-standing disagreement. Naruto sat at the table with Mavis beside him, the way she always was now, the proximity having become permanent, the resting position, and watched the room. He thought about the alley in Konoha. The old man's amber eye. The medallion pressed into his palm with fingers like iron and the word find. He thought about 3 weeks of roads and boats and mountain ranges. He thought about the castle rising out of the clouds and the theatrical groan of the gate and Dracula's red eyes reading him from across the courtyard with 16 years of grief at their center. He thought about Wayne saying "You're Drax kid" over a plate of eggs. Frank pressing both hands to his face. Mavis in his doorway with a tray of food, talking too fast, saying "I'm Mavis, I live here, obviously, because my dad owns the place." He reached into his shirt and pulled the medallion out, held it flat in his palm. The bat face up. The wings spread. The metal warm the way it had been warm the night the old man pressed it into his hand and had never stopped being warm since. He turned it over to the inscription side. The language he'd spent 3 weeks almost knowing. You are found wherever you go. He had been found. He had been in the process of being found for 16 years without knowing it. The finding had been happening in every fight he'd won and lost, every night he'd felt most awake, every time the dark had felt more like home than the light, every moment he'd been slightly too fast and slightly too strong and slightly too much himself to fit entirely into the shape of the life he'd been given. And then he'd walked up a mountain road and pushed open a gate and looked at a man with red eyes and held up a warm black medallion and said, "How do you know I'm not a monster?" And the finding had completed itself. He closed his hand around the medallion. "Hey," Mavis said, quietly, beside him. "Hey," he said. She was looking at him with the clear direct gaze, and she tilted her head slightly at the room, at Frank's broad back and the steam from the stove and the cubs running in circles and Wayne laughing at something Griffin said and Wanda's exhausted happy face and Dracula at the far end of the table with a book open that he wasn't reading, just present, just here. "What do you think?" The tilt of her head said. He looked at all of it. He felt the medallion in his closed fist and the warmth of his blood running at its natural temperature and the hotel breathing through its stone walls around him, the acoustic signature of home. He turned and looked at her, the full look back, all the way, the version that wasn't managing anything. He thought about what she'd said in the cafe. The first time those two things have felt like they could both be true. Inside and outside. The castle and the valley. The belonging and the freedom. "Yeah," he said. She knew what he meant. She always knew what he meant. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he leaned his head down against the top of hers, and Frank turned from the stove and saw it and started to make the sound, and Wanda put her hand on Frank's arm and shook her head very slightly. "Not now, let them have the quiet moment," and Frank swallowed it with visible effort and turned back to the stove. The kitchen was warm and the food was nearly ready and the hotel breathed around them in the evening dark, full and alive and entirely itself, the most improbable and necessary place in the world. Outside the castle, the mountains stood as they had always stood, patient and enormous. The clouds moved through the towers. The bats wheeled in the courtyard in their loose purposeful circles. The gates stood closed, solid, the theatrical groan waiting for its next deployment. In the valley below, somewhere in the dark of the eastern pass, a very old vampire with coal-red eyes and 1,000 years of certainty sat with a fire and a question he had never expected to be sitting with and turned it over and over in his long cold brilliant mind, feeling, for the first time in centuries, the specific weight of something that was not yet resolved. That was enough. That was more than enough. And in the hotel kitchen, Naruto Uzumaki, born to a vampire count and a human woman who had looked at his face once with everything she had, raised in a human village on the other side of the world, arrived at this castle by medallion and night journey and the dying wish of an old man who had spent 12 years searching, sat with his family around him and did not perform being home. He just was. The medallion was warm in his hand, the inscription side face up, the ancient script catching the kitchen light. "You are found wherever you go." He had been. He was. He would be. The story, unlike most, did not end here. It was far too loud and far too alive for that. There were mountains to walk and valleys to visit and Vladimir's cold brilliant mind to change and abilities still surfacing on their own timeline and a world outside the gate that Mavis was only just beginning to step into and 1,000 nights still to train in the underground room with the hole in the wall that nobody had repaired. But here, in the kitchen, with the food almost ready and the cubs underfoot and Frank's love expressed in steam and seasoning and Dracula reading his unread book at the end of the table and Mavis's head warm against his shoulder, here was the thing that made all the rest of it possible. Here was the thing worth coming home to.